Texas, 1941. The relentless summer sun bore down on the vast cotton fields of Odessa. Robert Mitchell wiped the sweat from his brow as he knelt beside the family tractor, his calloused hands working methodically to replace a damaged fuel line. At 32, his face already carried the weathered look of a man who had spent his life battling both the elements and the Great Depression. "Hand me that wrench, would you?" Robert gestured to his father, who stood watching with quiet approval. William Mitchell passed the tool, his own hands permanently stained with engine oil and dirt from decades of farming. "You always had a gift for fixing things, son." Robert tightened the final connection and stood, stretching his back. "Just practical necessity, Pa. Can't afford to call a mechanic every time something breaks." The tractor rumbled to life, its engine purring more smoothly than it had in years. To Robert, the sound was like music, a mechanical symphony that had fascinated him since childhood. His mind drifted back 17 years, to 1924 when he was just a boy of 15. The day that changed everything. The day when the Army's 1st Cavalry Division, then experimenting with mechanization, had paraded through Odessa on their cross-country maneuvers. He remembered standing transfixed at the roadside as the steel behemoths rumbled past, their tracks churning up dust clouds that made the cotton fields seem to disappear in a haze. The commanding officer, sitting proud atop the lead tank, had noticed young Robert's fascination and offered a casual salute. In that moment, something ignited in Robert's soul, a burning desire to one day command such awesome machines of war. Life, however, had other plans. The Depression hit when Robert was in his late teens, just as he'd managed to secure a place at a technical college in Dallas. His family needed him at home, and his dreams of engineering were set aside to help keep the family farm alive. But he never stopped learning. Every broken piece of machinery became an opportunity to understand, to master, to improve. The Mitchell farm became known throughout the county for having equipment that seemed to defy age, kept running by Robert's mechanical intuition and ingenuity. Now at 32, Robert had settled into the rhythm of rural life. He was engaged to Mary Cooper, the daughter of a neighboring farmer, and a fall wedding was planned. The date was set for December 8, 1941, chosen because the harvest would be in and the winter planting not yet begun. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Robert's younger brother James spoke excitedly about news from Europe. "They say Hitler's tanks are rolling through everything in their path. The British can't stop them." William Mitchell grunted. "European problems. We've got enough troubles of our own without worrying about another war across the ocean." Robert said nothing, but his mind was racing. He'd been following the war news closely, reading everything he could about the German panzer divisions and their lightning warfare tactics. In quiet moments, he'd sketch tank designs in his notebook, imagining improvements and innovations. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Robert was in town picking up supplies when he noticed a crowd gathering outside the recruitment office. A sergeant stood on a makeshift platform, his voice booming across the town square. "America needs men of courage and skill. The mechanized divisions are the future of warfare, and we need men who understand machines." Robert stopped to listen, the seed planted so many years ago beginning to sprout anew. The recruiter noticed Robert's interest. "You look like a man who knows his way around an engine." "I fixed everything from tractors to combines," Robert admitted. "Son, the Army could use men like you. We're building an armored force unlike anything the world has ever seen." For a moment, Robert was 15 again, watching those tanks roll through town. But then reality asserted itself. "I'm getting married soon, got responsibilities." "Just something to think about," the recruiter said with a knowing smile. "Some responsibilities extend beyond our own backyards." The words haunted Robert as he drove home, the truck loaded with supplies. Mary was waiting at the farmhouse, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight. "I saw you talking to that recruiter," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Just being polite." Mary's blue eyes studied him. "Robert Mitchell, I've known you since we were children. I can tell when something's stirring in that mind of yours." He took her hands in his. "It's nothing, really." But that night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant for something more. The world was changing, and somewhere deep inside, he knew his destiny lay beyond these cotton fields. Sunday, December 7th, 1941, dawned like any other. The Mitchell family was preparing for church when the radio broadcast was interrupted. The announcer's voice trembled as he described the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The family gathered around the radio in stunned silence as reports continued to come in. Japanese planes had launched a devastating assault on the U.S. Pacific Fleet. America was at war. Robert felt an immediate, visceral reaction. It wasn't just patriotism, though that certainly burned within him. It was as if the path he was meant to walk had suddenly been illuminated. He looked at Mary, who was already watching him with a knowing dread in her eyes. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't say it." After church, as the community buzzed with shock and anger, Robert took Mary for a walk through the orchard behind the Mitchell home. "Our wedding is in 1 day," she said before he could speak. "1 day, Robert." "I know. You're going to enlist." It wasn't a question, but Robert answered anyway. "I have to." "You don't have to do anything," Mary's voice cracked. "You choose to leave. You choose the army over me." "That's not fair," Robert protested, though he understood her pain. "This isn't about you or me. Our country is at war. They don't need you specifically, Robert. There are millions of men in America. But I know machines. I can contribute in ways that others can't." He took her hands. "It won't be forever." Mary pulled away, tears streaming down her face. "You've always had this restlessness in you. I've seen it for years, the way you look at the horizon. I thought I would be enough to keep you here." "Mary, no, I won't stand in your way. But I won't wait either." Her words fell like hammer blows. "I can't build my life on maybes and some days." Robert stood frozen as Mary walked back toward the house. That evening, when he told his family of his decision, his father nodded solemnly while his mother wept quietly. "You're 32, his father said. "Most volunteers will be a decade younger." "Age brings experience," Robert replied. "And I've been maintaining machinery since before most of those boys could read." The next morning, Robert Mitchell walked into the recruitment office in Odessa. The same sergeant from the town square greeted him with a knowing smile. "I was wondering if you'd come in." "I'd like to join the armored force," Robert said firmly. The sergeant sized him up. "You're older than most of our volunteers. I've been fixing engines and machinery for 20 years. There's not a mechanical problem I can't solve, and I learn fast." The sergeant nodded. "We need men who understand machines, that's for sure." He pushed a form across the desk. "Fill this out and welcome to the United States Army, Mr. Mitchell." As Robert completed the paperwork, the sergeant studied him. "You know, with your age and mechanical expertise, you might qualify for officer candidate school after basic training." Robert looked up, surprised. "An officer? This isn't going to be like the last war. We need smart men leading our tanks, not just brave ones." As Robert left the recruitment office, he felt both a crushing weight and a liberating lightness. He'd just altered the course of his life irrevocably. The wedding was off. Mary was gone. But for the first time in years, he was moving toward something rather than watching life pass him by. That evening, he wrote a letter to Mary, trying to explain what he could barely understand himself. The pull towards something greater, the sense that his skills and knowledge could make a real difference. He didn't expect forgiveness, but he hoped for understanding. 3 days later, Robert Mitchell boarded a train bound for Fort Knox, Kentucky, the home of the U.S. Armored Force. As the Texas landscape rolled past the window, he felt a strange sensation of leaving one life behind while rushing headlong into another. The conductor called out above the rhythmic clacking of the train wheels. "Next stop, Fort Worth, Texas." Robert watched as other young men in civilian clothes boarded, their faces showing the same mix of apprehension and determination that he felt. America was mobilizing for war, and he was part of something momentous. A young man in a crisp suit sat down across from Robert. "You heading to Fort Knox too?" Robert nodded. "Armored Force." "Same here. Name's Wilson, James Wilson." He extended his hand. "Though everybody calls me Duke." "Robert Mitchell." They shook hands. "Why Duke?" Wilson grinned. "Used to race cars before all this. They said I drove like I owned the road." It was the beginning of a friendship that would be forged in the heat of training and tempered in the fires of war. As the train carried them eastward, neither man could know just how intertwined their fates would become, or the crucible that awaited them both. Chapter 2, Steel Forged in Training. Fort Knox, Kentucky, January 1942. The morning air bit with winter's chill as Robert Mitchell stood at attention in a long line of recruits. Despite being a decade older than most, his tall frame and weathered strength helped him blend in with the younger men. Drill Sergeant Harkness paced before them, his voice cutting through the cold. "Forget everything you think you know. From this moment, you are no longer farmers or factory workers or college boys. You are soldiers in the United States Army Armored Force, and you will become the most lethal fighting machine this world has ever seen." Basic training was a brutal awakening. The physical demands pushed every man to his limits, but Robert's years of farm labor had prepared him well. Where he truly excelled, however, was in the technical training. When the recruits were first introduced to the M3 Stuart light tank, most stared in bewilderment at the complicated machinery. Robert approached it with the same methodical curiosity he'd applied to farm equipment his entire life. "Mitchell," the technical instructor called out, "explain the transmission system to the group." Without hesitation, Robert detailed the workings of the Gueberson radial engine and its connected drivetrain, even suggesting modifications that might improve performance in muddy conditions. The instructor raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you learn that, Mitchell?" "Principles are the same as a tractor, sir, just more sophisticated. Once you understand how power transfers, the rest is just details." Word of Robert's mechanical aptitude spread quickly. When tanks broke down during exercises, instructors often called him over before the maintenance crews. By the third month of training, he was spending his evenings helping to maintain the training fleet. It was during one such evening that Colonel William Richardson first noticed him. Richardson, a West Point graduate and one of the early champions of armored warfare, was touring the maintenance facilities when he observed Robert diagnosing an engine problem that had stumped the regular mechanics. "You've got a gift, Private," Richardson said, startling Robert, who hadn't noticed the officer's approach. "Just experience, sir. Experience is a gift in its own right." Richardson watched as Robert's hands moved with practiced efficiency. "How long have you been working on engines?" "Since I was tall enough to see over a tractor hood, sir. About 20 years now." Richardson nodded thoughtfully. "The Germans have been building their Panzer Force for years. We're playing catch-up. We need men who can think on their feet when these machines inevitably fail in the field." "Yes, sir." "You're older than most of the recruits." 32, sir." "Have you considered officer candidate school?" Robert wiped his hands on a rag. "The recruitment sergeant mentioned it might be a possibility." "More than a possibility. I'll see to it personally." Richardson's gaze was evaluating. "We need tank commanders who understand their machines from the inside out." That conversation altered Robert's trajectory. After completing basic training, he was immediately sent to Fort Knox's officer candidate school, where the challenges shifted from purely physical to tactical and leadership-focused. OCS tested Robert in new ways. The mechanical problems he could solve intuitively, but leading men and developing battle tactics required a different kind of thinking. He studied relentlessly, staying up late poring over manuals and historical accounts of tank warfare. His letters home became less frequent as the demands of training consumed his time. When he did write, he shared little about the grueling conditions, focusing instead on his growing expertise and the camaraderie among the candidates. Mary never replied to his letters, but his mother wrote that she had gone through with a wedding to the son of a local banker. The news stung, but Robert found himself too busy to dwell on it. The war consumed his thoughts, and his determination to excel left little room for regrets. In May 1942, after 3 intense months of officer candidate school, Robert Mitchell was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. Colonel Richardson attended the ceremony, pinning the gold bars on Robert's shoulders himself. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Mitchell," Richardson said with a firm handshake. "Your real education is just beginning." Rather than being assigned immediately to a combat unit, Robert received unexpected orders. He was to remain at Fort Knox as a training officer, teaching new recruits the fundamentals of tank operation and maintenance. "I should be preparing for deployment, sir," Robert protested to Richardson. "I didn't join to stay stateside." "You'll get your chance at combat, Mitchell, but right now your knowledge is more valuable here. We're creating an armored force from scratch, and we need instructors who know what they're talking about." For the next year, Robert threw himself into his role, developing new training methods that emphasized practical problem-solving over rote learning. He insisted that every tank crewman understand basic maintenance, regardless of their specific role. "When you're in combat and your track breaks," he told his classes, "the enemy isn't going to wait while you radio for a mechanic. Every man needs to know how to keep these machines running." His unorthodox methods raised eyebrows among the more traditional officers, but the results were undeniable. Crews trained under Lieutenant Mitchell consistently outperformed others in field exercises and maintenance efficiency. By early 1943, Robert had been promoted to first lieutenant and had earned a reputation as one of Fort Knox's most effective training officers. But as reports came in from North Africa about American M3 tanks being outgunned by German panzers, his desire to join the fight intensified. During a particularly frustrating day after receiving yet another report of tank losses in Tunisia, Robert confronted Colonel Richardson directly. "Sir, I appreciate the importance of training, but American boys are dying because they don't know how to counter German armor. I should be there, not here." Richardson studied him for a long moment. "Walk with me, Lieutenant." They strolled through the training grounds, watching as a new batch of recruits struggled with track maintenance. "You see that?" Richardson pointed to a young soldier who was incorrectly tensioning a track. "Without proper training, that mistake gets men killed. Your value isn't just in your own abilities, but in how many lives you save by preparing others. With respect, sir, I didn't join to be a teacher. No one ever does." Richardson stopped walking. "But sometimes teaching is the greater service. However, I understand your frustration. I've recommended you for promotion to captain, and I'm arranging a transfer to a combat unit that's forming up for the European theater." Robert straightened. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. I'm sending you to the 3rd Armored Division. They're still working up, but they'll be part of the invasion force whenever that comes. They're getting the new M4 Shermans, and they'll need officers who understand the mechanics." In July 1943, Captain Robert Mitchell reported to the 3rd Armored Division at Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. The division, nicknamed Spearhead, was in its final stages of preparation before deployment to England. Robert was assigned to command Company YN of the 32nd Armored Regiment's 3rd Battalion. His reputation had preceded him, and he found both respect and skepticism from his new colleagues. "Heard you were Knox's star instructor," his battalion commander said during their first meeting. "Let's see if classroom theory holds up when the shells start flying." "Nothing theoretical about keeping a tank running when it's shot to hell, sir," Robert replied evenly. "I intend to make sure my company knows how to fight and how to survive." Over the following months, Robert drilled his company relentlessly, focusing not just on standard tactics, but on adapting to unexpected situations. He developed a philosophy that would later become his trademark: train hard, fight easy. His methods were demanding but effective. While other officers allowed their men to treat training exercises as simulations, Robert insisted on absolute realism, often to the point of exhaustion. "In battle, you won't be rested, you won't be comfortable, you won't have time to think. Your training needs to be so ingrained that your body reacts correctly even when your mind is paralyzed with fear." In September 1943, just before the division's deployment to England, Robert received his final promotion to captain. The timing coincided with his assignment of a brand new Sherman tank and the authority to select his own crew. For his driver, he chose Sergeant James Duke Wilson, his friend from the train journey to Fort Knox, who had proven himself an expert at maneuvering the 30-ton Sherman in the tightest spaces. As gunner, he selected Sergeant Thomas Harris, a former hunting guide from Montana with uncanny accuracy. The men called him Eagle Eye for his ability to hit targets at extreme ranges during practice. For loader, he picked Corporal Michael Sullivan, a former medical student who had enlisted after Pearl Harbor. Sullivan's precise movements and quick thinking earned him the nickname Doc, though his medical background was only part of the reason. Rounding out the crew was Private Daniel Martinez, a radio operator from New Mexico whose technical expertise with communications equipment was unmatched in the company. The men naturally called him Radio. Together, they formed a crew that combined experience, technical knowledge, and raw talent. Robert pushed them harder than the others, knowing that as company commander, his tank would often lead the way into danger. The night before the division was scheduled to depart for the East Coast and then England, Robert received a letter. The return address showed Mary's maiden name, not her married one. Alone in his quarters, he opened it with unsteady hands. The letter was brief, just a few paragraphs explaining that her marriage had been a mistake born of anger and hurt. She was filing for divorce and wanted Robert to know that she had been wrong to react as she had. The final line struck him like a physical blow. "I realize now that your decision wasn't about leaving me, but about becoming who you were meant to be. I'm sorry I couldn't understand that then. Please be safe, Robert. Come back when you can." It was signed simply, Mary. Robert sat for a long time, the letter in his hands, emotions warring within him. Part of him wanted to respond immediately, to tell her he would come back to her after the war. But another part, the part that had been transformed by his 1.5 years in the Army, recognized that he was no longer the same man who had left that farm in Texas. In the end, he wrote a short, kind reply, explaining that while he cherished their shared past, they had both moved on to different lives. He wished her happiness and promised to return to Texas after the war, though not to resume what had been interrupted. As he sealed the envelope, a knock came at his door. It was Duke Wilson. "Tank's ready, Captain. The boys are calling her Thunder Road." Robert raised an eyebrow. Thunder Road? After that old mountain ballad about moonshine runners, thought it fit, since we'll be running through the Germans just as fast. Robert nodded, appreciating the sentiment. Thunder Road it is. The next morning, as the 3rd Armored Division prepared to depart, Colonel Richardson made an unexpected appearance to see them off. "Remember what you've learned, Captain," and he said, shaking Robert's hand, "and what you've taught others. Bring your men home." "Yes, sir, I intend to." As the troop trains pulled away from Fort Indiantown Gap, Robert Mitchell stood on the platform of the last car, watching America recede behind him. The farm boy from Texas was gone, replaced by a tank commander headed for war. The transformation was complete, but the real test still awaited across the Atlantic. Chapter 3. Thunder Road takes form. The crossing to England in early October 1943 was a tense affair. German U-boats still prowled the Atlantic, and the massive convoy of troop ships zigzagged across the ocean under the watchful protection of Navy destroyers. Many soldiers suffered from seasickness, but Robert found the mechanical rhythm of the ship oddly comforting. He spent much of the journey studying maps of Europe and technical manuals for the Sherman tank, looking for advantages that might compensate for its known weaknesses. The M4 Sherman was America's primary battle tank, a compromise between mobility, firepower, and production efficiency. Weighing 30 tons and armed with a 75mm main gun, it was a capable machine, but intelligence reports suggested it would be outmatched by the heavier German Panthers and Tigers. "We'll be undergunned," Robert explained to his crew as they huddled in a corner of the mess hall. "The Panther has a 75mm gun like ours, but with higher velocity. The Tiger's 80mm will punch through our armor at over 1,000 yards. So what's our edge?" Eagle Eye Harris asked, always focused on the practical. "Mobility, reliability, and numbers," Robert replied. "The Sherman is faster and more mechanically reliable than German tanks, and we'll have a lot more of them. We'll have to use those advantages." Doc Sullivan frowned. "But we'll still be at a disadvantage in a head-to-head fight." "Then we avoid head-to-head whenever possible," Robert said firmly. "We flank, we maneuver, we coordinate with artillery and air support, and we train to make our first shot count, because we might not get a second." Upon arriving in England, the 3rd Armored Division established headquarters in Dorset, where they continued training while awaiting the invasion of Europe. The green English countryside was transformed into a massive military camp as Allied forces gathered for what would become Operation Overlord. The months in England were intense. Robert drilled his company relentlessly, incorporating lessons from American tank battles in North Africa and Italy. He developed a particularly close relationship with his own crew, pushing them to function as a seamless unit. "Seconds matter," he repeated during drills. "The difference between life and death can be how quickly Sullivan loads a shell, how accurately Harris aims, or how smoothly Wilson positions us for the shot." Each crew member took this to heart, honing their specific skills to near perfection. Duke Wilson practiced rapid gear changes and evasive maneuvers. Eagle Eye Harris could identify German armor at extreme distances and knew the weak points of each model. Doc Sullivan reduced his loading time to 5 seconds flat, and Radio Martinez mastered the art of clear communication under simulated battle noise. In April 1944, as the invasion preparations intensified, Robert was called to a briefing with other company commanders. The room fell silent as General Maurice Rose, commanding general of the 3rd Armored Division, entered. "Gentlemen," Rose began, "we're not going in with the first wave. The 3rd Armored will land in Normandy approximately 2 weeks after the initial invasion as part of the breakout force. That gives us additional time to prepare, which I expect you to use wisely." Robert returned to his company with renewed determination. "2 more weeks to get it right," he told his men. "We're going to use every minute." On June 6, 1944, the Allied forces launched the Normandy invasion. Robert and his men gathered around radios, listening intently to reports of the massive amphibious assault. The beachheads were secured at a terrible cost, and the struggle to break out of the coastal areas began. As promised, the 3rd Armored Division landed in Normandy in late June. Robert's first impression of France was one of devastation. The once beautiful Norman countryside was scarred by bomb craters and artillery fire. Villages lay in ruins, and the roads were choked with military traffic. Thunder Road, with its fresh paint and proud markings, rolled off the landing craft and onto French soil. The crew had stenciled the name on both sides of the hull, along with an image of a lightning bolt striking a road. Not quite how I pictured France, Duke commented as he navigated through the chaos of the beachhead. It'll look better once we push the Germans back to Berlin, Robert replied, standing in the commander's hatch, scanning the horizon. The 3rd Armored Division moved inland to assembly areas near St. Lo, where they prepared for Operation Cobra, the major American breakout attempt. The hedgerow country of Normandy proved challenging for tanks, with its ancient earthen embankments and narrow lanes creating perfect ambush terrain. On the evening before their first combat engagement, Robert gathered his crew around Thunder Road. The tension was palpable, each man lost in his own thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. Get some sleep, Robert advised, though he knew rest would be elusive. Remember your training. Trust each other. Trust this machine. We prepared for this moment. That night, as the others tried to sleep, Robert wrote a letter to his parents. He described the beauty of England, the determination of the men, anything but his own fears. After sealing it, he took out a small leather-bound notebook and made an entry, a habit he'd begun during training. In it, he recorded technical observations about the Sherman's performance, ideas for tactical improvements, and personal reflections he shared with no one else. Dawn broke on June 29, 1944. Company Y of the 32nd Armored Regiment moved out as part of a task force advancing northeast of St. Lo. Thunder Road led the company, with Robert standing in the commander's hatch, binoculars scanning the terrain ahead. The morning was unnaturally quiet, broken only by the rumble of tank engines and the occasional distant thump of artillery. The column advanced cautiously through the hedgerow country, each intersection a potential death trap. "Eyes sharp, Eagle," Robert called down to his gunner. "Germans like to hide anti-tank guns at road junctions." "Visibility's poor with these damned hedgerows," Harris replied, his voice tense. They approached the small village of Villiers-Fossard, seemingly deserted in the morning haze. Robert ordered the column to halt just outside the village while a reconnaissance team checked for enemy presence. The scouts had barely entered the first street when machine gun fire erupted from a stone building near the church. The men dove for cover as bullets stitched the ground around them. "Enemy contact front," Robert shouted into the radio. "Eagle, target that building with the red roof. He round." "Identified," Harris replied as Sullivan loaded a high-explosive shell. "Fire when ready." Thunder Road's 75mm gun roared, sending a shell smashing into the building. Stone and dust erupted in a cloud as the machine gun fell silent. "Advance column formation," Robert ordered. "Be ready for more resistance." The tanks rolled forward into the village, engines growling. They had barely reached the central square when the distinctive crack of a high-velocity gun split the air. One of the trailing Shermans erupted in flames as a German anti-tank round penetrated its side armor. "Panzer IV, right flank," Martinez called out, relaying reports from the stricken tank's survivors. Robert spotted the German medium tank partially concealed behind a farmhouse. "Target identified, Eagle. Armor piercing, 3 o'clock. "Got him!" Harris aligned the gun as Sullivan rammed a solid shot into the breach. "On the way." The Sherman's gun thundered again, the round striking the Panzer's turret but glancing off its sloped armor. Before they could load another round, the German tank fired again, missing Thunder Road by inches. "Flank him," Robert ordered. "Duke, get us around that building." Wilson expertly maneuvered the 30-ton vehicle through the narrow street, the tracks crushing rubble beneath them. As they cleared the building, they had a perfect shot at the Panzer's more vulnerable side armor. "Fire!" This time, Harris's aim was true. The armor-piercing round punched through the German tank, and a moment later, flames began pouring from the hatches. "Target destroyed," Harris reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. But the village still held dangers. As Thunder Road advanced toward the burning Panzer, a Panzerschreck anti-tank rocket streaked from an upper window of a nearby house, barely missing their turret. "Infantry with 8 weapons," Robert shouted. "Martinez, call for support. Wilson, back up." Thunder Road reversed just as another rocket flew past. Machine gun fire from the other Shermans raked the buildings, suppressing the German infantry. For nearly an hour, the battle for Villiers-Fossard raged. Thunder Road destroyed 2 more German vehicles, a half-track and an armored car, while coordinating the company's movements through the village. When the fighting finally subsided, the Americans held the village, but at a cost. 2 Shermans had been destroyed, and several infantrymen lay wounded or dead in the streets. As the company secured their position, Robert climbed down from Thunder Road to check on his men. The reality of combat was settling in, the adrenaline giving way to a sober awareness of their vulnerability. Approaching one of the destroyed Shermans, Robert found the survivors gathered nearby, still in shock. The tank commander, Lieutenant Parker, had been a friend since Fort Knox. "What happened, Jim?" Robert asked quietly. Parker's face was blackened with soot, his eyes haunted. "We never saw it coming, Bob. One minute we're advancing, the next we're brewing up. My driver and bow gunner didn't make it out." Robert gripped his friend's shoulder, words failing him. This was the true face of armored warfare, not the clean tactical exercises of training. Men burned alive inside steel coffins, survivors left to wonder why they had been spared. That evening, as the company established a defensive perimeter around the village, Robert gathered his crew around Thunder Road. They were subdued, the initial baptism of fire having stripped away any romantic notions of war. "We were lucky today," Robert said bluntly. "But luck only goes so far. The Germans have better tanks and more experience. We need to be smarter, faster, and more aggressive." "Their Panzer IV nearly got us with that first shot," Eagle Eye noted. "If it had hit a few inches lower." "But it didn't," Robert cut him off. "And we learned something valuable. Their tanks have better guns, but their armor isn't invulnerable, especially from the sides and rear. We avoid frontal engagements whenever possible." Doc Sullivan, who had helped treat the wounded after the battle, looked troubled. "Parker's men never had a chance. They were gone before they knew what hit them." "That's why we train," Robert insisted. "That's why we drill until every movement is automatic. In that tank, you don't have time to think, only to react." As darkness fell over Villiers' facade, Robert made another entry in his notebook. This one was different from the others, less technical and more personal. He wrote about Parker's eyes, about the smell of burning rubber and flesh, about the strange calm that had come over him during the fight. The company remained in position for 2 days, repelling several German counterattacks. Thunder Road added 2 more kills to its tally, a Stug 3 assault gun and another Panzer IV. On the morning of July 3rd, orders came through for the company to advance as part of a larger offensive. As they prepared to move out, Robert received a message to report to battalion headquarters. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Richardson, had arrived at the front. He greeted Robert with a firm handshake. "How's Thunder Road treating you, Captain?" "She's performed well, sir. Crew's shaping up too." Richardson nodded. "I've reviewed the action reports. Your company has the highest kill ratio in the battalion. We've been fortunate." "It's not fortune, Mitchell. It's preparation and leadership." Richardson fixed him with a serious look. "The next phase is going to be harder. Intelligence reports suggest Panther tanks moving into the sector." Robert's expression tightened. The Panther, with its high-velocity 75mm gun and sloped armor, was a far more formidable opponent than the Panzer IVs they'd faced so far. "Our 75mm will struggle against their frontal armor," he said. "That's putting it mildly," Richardson agreed. "We're expecting some new Shermans with 76mm guns soon, but for now you'll have to work with what you have. Find the flanks, use terrain, coordinate with air support when available." "Yes, sir." As Robert turned to leave, Richardson added, "One more thing, Mitchell. General Rose has taken notice of your company's performance. Keep it up, and there could be a promotion in your future." Robert returned to Thunder Road, where his crew was making final preparations to move out. The brief confidence from their initial successes was now tempered by the knowledge that greater challenges lay ahead. "Mount up," he ordered, climbing onto the tank. "We're heading east." As Thunder Road led the column out of Villiers' facade, Robert stood in the commander's hatch, scanning the horizon. The hedgerow country was giving way to more open terrain, which would offer better mobility but less cover. The Sherman's engine rumbled beneath him, a mechanical heartbeat that had become as familiar as his own. Around him, the men of Company Y followed in their own tanks, trusting his leadership to guide them through the hell that awaited. The farm boy from Texas was gone forever, replaced by a tank commander whose baptism of fire was complete. Ahead lay months of brutal combat, triumphs and tragedies beyond imagination. But in that moment, as Thunder Road rolled toward destiny, Captain Robert Mitchell felt a strange sense of clarity. This was where he belonged, not behind a plow on Texas soil, but leading men in the greatest conflict the world had ever known. Whatever came next, he would face it from the commander's hatch of Thunder Road, with steel determination and unwavering resolve. Chapter 4. The First Test at Normandy. By mid-July 1944, the Allied forces were still battling to break out of the Normandy beachhead. Operation Cobra was planned as a massive offensive to shatter the German lines and finally achieve the mobility warfare that American armored divisions were designed for. Thunder Road and Company. I had been in near continuous combat since their arrival in France. Robert's crew had developed a rhythm to their operations, functioning with the precision of a well-oiled machine. They had 5 confirmed kills to their name, a number that put them among the top performers in the battalion, but they had also seen the devastating toll of armored warfare. 3 Shermans from Company Y had been lost in the brutal hedgerow fighting, their burned-out hulls grim monuments to the vulnerability of American armor. Each loss weighed heavily on Robert, who knew the men inside not just as subordinates, but as individuals with stories, hopes, and families waiting for them back home. On the evening before Operation Cobra was to commence, Robert gathered his officers for a final briefing. Thunder Road was parked in an apple orchard, its hull showing the scars of recent combat. The crew had painted 5 hash marks on the barrel of the 75-millimeter gun, one for each enemy vehicle destroyed. "Tomorrow changes everything," Robert explained, using a stick to draw in the dirt. "Air Force is hitting the German lines with everything they've got. Then we punch through the gap. Once we're in open country, we exploit with speed. The objective is to keep moving, bypass resistance when possible, and get deep behind their lines." Lieutenant Perkins, a young replacement officer, raised a concern. "Intel says there are Panthers in the sector, sir. Our 75s can't penetrate their frontal armor." "Which is why we don't engage them frontally," Robert replied. "We maneuver for flank shots, use terrain for cover, and coordinate with TDs when available." The tank destroyers, with their more powerful guns, were specifically designed to counter enemy armor, but they were in short supply and couldn't always support the advancing tanks. "Remember, the Sherman has advantages too," Robert continued. "Better reliability, better range, better speed. Use those to offset the firepower disadvantage. And most importantly, use your crews. A well-trained crew in a decent tank will beat a poorly trained crew in a superior tank every time." As the officers dispersed to brief their own men, Robert climbed aboard Thunder Road where his crew was performing maintenance checks. Despite days of combat and minimal rest, they worked with focused precision. "How's she looking?" Robert asked Duke Wilson, who was checking the transmission. "Running smooth, Captain. Change the oil and clean the filters. She'll get us through tomorrow." Eagle Eye Harris was meticulously calibrating his gun sights. "Zeroed at 800 yards, he reported. "Could use more AP rounds, though." Doc Sullivan was organizing the ammunition storage, while Radio Martinez tested the communications equipment. Every man knew his role and executed it without prompting, a testament to the bond they'd formed. "Get some rest," Robert advised, though he knew sleep would be elusive for all of them. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." That night, as the others tried to sleep beneath Thunder Road's protective bulk, Robert made another entry in his notebook. He documented the mechanical issues they'd encountered, the effectiveness of various ammunition types against German armor, and his observations on enemy tactics. But he also wrote about the men, both those still with him and those who hadn't made it. He described Parker's family back in Oregon, Carson's new baby he'd never seen, Miller's plan to open a garage after the war. Robert felt a responsibility to remember them all, to carry their stories forward. July 25th dawned with the earth-shaking thunder of over 1,000 Allied aircraft dropping bombs on the German positions. The sky darkened with smoke and dust as the entire front seemed to erupt. When the bombardment finally lifted, the tanks of the 3rd Armored Division moved forward into the devastated landscape. Thunder Road led Company 1 through terrain that resembled a lunar surface more than the French countryside. Massive craters, splintered trees, and the acrid smell of explosives surrounded them as they advanced toward what had been the German front lines. "Stay alert," Robert warned over the radio. "The bombing won't have gotten everything." His caution proved warranted when machine gun fire erupted from a partially collapsed bunker. The column halted as infantry moved up to deal with the threat. "This is taking too long," Robert muttered, watching the careful advance of the foot soldiers. The momentum of the breakthrough was being lost to these pockets of resistance. Making a quick decision, he ordered, "Eagle, put an HE round into that bunker. Doc, load high explosive." Thunder Road's 75-millimeter gun roared, sending a shell directly into the firing slit of the bunker. The explosion silenced the machine gun, allowing the infantry to move up and secure the position. "All units, maintain momentum," Robert commanded over the radio. "We need to push through before they reorganize." The company continued at its advance, encountering sporadic resistance, but nothing that could halt their progress. By noon, they had broken through the main German defenses and were entering more open country. It was here, as the terrain opened up, that they encountered their first real challenge of the day. Rounding a bend in a country road, Thunder Road nearly collided with a German Panther tank emerging from a tree line. "Panther front!" Eagle Eye shouted, already swinging the turret. "AP round," Robert ordered as Wilson threw the Sherman into reverse. The Panther fired first, its 75mm high-velocity shells screaming past Thunder Road's turret by inches. Doc Sullivan slammed an armor-piercing round into the breech as Eagle Eye lined up his shot. "Fire!" The Sherman's gun thundered, the shell striking the Panther's front glacis plate, but merely scarring the sloped armor. "No penetration," Eagle reported as the German tank began to turn its turret for another shot. Robert made a split-second decision. "Duke, hard right, get us off the road." Wilson expertly maneuvered the Sherman down an embankment and behind a small rise, just as another German shell whistled overhead. "Circle left, fast as you can," Robert ordered. "We need to flank him before he repositions." The Sherman's engine roared as Wilson pushed it to its limits, using the terrain to shield them from the Panther's deadly gun. Robert had spotted a weakness in the German position. The Panther was near a stone wall that would limit its ability to turn quickly. "Martinez, tell 2nd Platoon to provide covering fire. Keep that Panther focused forward." As the tanks of 2nd Platoon engaged the Panther from the front, staying hull down behind rises in the terrain, Thunder Road completed its flanking maneuver, emerging from a small orchard directly to the Panther's right side. "Target acquired," Eagle Eye called, his sight picture filled with the less protected side armor of the German tank. "Fire!" This time, the Sherman's armor-piercing round found its mark, penetrating the Panther's side and igniting ammunition inside. The German tank erupted in flames, its turret eventually blown completely off by the internal explosion. "Target destroyed," Harris reported with professional detachment, though the tension was evident in his voice. "Good work," Robert acknowledged, though his mind was already moving to the next challenge. "All units, reform column and continue advance." The engagement had demonstrated both the Sherman's disadvantage in a frontal fight against German armor and how proper tactics could overcome that disadvantage. It was a lesson Robert would emphasize repeatedly in the coming days. As Operation Cobra gained momentum, the 3rd Armored Division pushed deeper into German-held territory. The fighting changed character, shifting from the static hedgerow battles to a more fluid, mobile warfare that suited American armored doctrine. Thunder Road's crew settled into a rhythm of advance, engage, refuel, and continue. The days blurred together in an exhausting cycle of combat, maintenance, and brief periods of rest. They developed a sixth sense for danger, an intuitive understanding of the battlefield that kept them alive when other tanks were hit. On August 1st, Company I was tasked with securing a crucial crossroads near the town of Mayenne. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance, but as Thunder Road led the column toward the objective, Robert's instincts warned him something was wrong. "It's too quiet," he observed, scanning the tree line through his binoculars. "Wilson, slow our approach. Martinez, tell the column to increase spacing." The caution proved justified when the distinctive sound of an 88mm gun shattered the morning stillness. A Sherman at the rear of the column erupted in flames, its turret blown completely off by the powerful German weapon. "88, right flank, in the trees," Robert shouted, spotting the muzzle flash. "All units, deploy, seek cover." The American tanks scattered, using terrain features for protection as they tried to locate the well-camouflaged anti-tank gun. Thunder Road positioned itself behind a stone farmhouse, its turret traversed toward the threat. "I can't see it clearly," Eagle Eye reported, frustration evident in his voice. "They've got it well hidden." Robert made a quick assessment. The 88mm gun, likely towed rather than mounted on a tank, had excellent range and penetration but limited mobility. If they could flank it without being seen, "Duke, take us around the left side of that farmhouse, then through the orchard. Nice and slow, minimum noise." He switched to the company radio. "2nd Platoon, provide covering fire on my signal. 3rd Platoon, prepare to advance once the gun is neutralized." Thunder Road crept forward, its engine throttled back to reduce noise, moving through the dappled shadows of an apple orchard. Robert stood in the commander's hatch, every sense alert for danger as they worked their way around the German position. After tense minutes that felt like hours, they emerged at an angle that gave them a clear view of the 88mm gun and its crew, who still focused on the main American position. The Germans had dug the gun in well, with overhead camouflage and protective earthworks, but they hadn't secured their flank. Target acquired, Eagle Eye reported, the gun sight focused on the exposed position. He loaded. Fire, Robert ordered quietly. Thunder Road's 75-millimeter gun roared, sending a high-explosive shell directly into the German gun position. The explosion killed or wounded most of the crew immediately, while secondary blasts erupted as ammunition cookied off. Second platoon, advance, Robert ordered over the radio. Secure that position. As the American tanks moved forward, a previously undetected German half-track attempted to flee from a nearby barn. Eagle Eye traversed the turret quickly, firing a second high-explosive round that left the vehicle a burning wreck. By noon, the crossroads was secured, allowing the division's advance to continue. The company had lost one tank to the 88, with 3 crewmen killed, a painful reminder of the deadly effectiveness of German anti-tank weapons. That evening, as Thunder Road's crew performed maintenance, Robert was summoned to a meeting with Colonel Richardson, who had arrived to assess the situation. Your company's performance continues to impress, Richardson noted, studying a map of their advance. 7 confirmed enemy vehicles destroyed, and that 88-millimeter gun was a particularly nice piece of work. The men are learning fast, Robert replied. They're adapting to the realities of fighting German armor. What's your assessment of the Sherman at this point? Richardson asked. Headquarters wants feedback from frontline commanders. Robert chose his words carefully. It's a reliable machine, good mobility, decent gun for infantry support. But against Panthers and Tigers, we're at a severe disadvantage. The 75mm just doesn't have the penetration we need. The 76mm versions are coming, Richardson assured him. Not enough yet, but they'll help. In the meantime? In the meantime, we adapt. Flank shots whenever possible. Use terrain and mobility. Never fight their way if we can avoid it. Richardson nodded approval. That's why you're succeeding where others have struggled. You're fighting smart, not just hard. He paused, then added, there's talk of a new German tank, heavier than the Tiger. Intelligence is sketchy, but they're calling it a King Tiger. Robert absorbed this with concern. The standard Tiger was already nearly impervious to their 75mm guns from the front. A heavier version would be even more formidable. Then we'll need to be even smarter, he said simply. As August progressed, the Allied breakout gained momentum. The 3rd Armored Division pushed eastward across France, sometimes covering 20 miles or more in a day. Thunder Road led the way for Company Y, its crew functioning with the seamless coordination that came from shared combat experience. The stress of continuous operations took its toll. Duke Wilson developed a persistent cough from the diesel fumes that filled the tank's interior. Eagle Eye Harris complained of headaches from the constant strain of peering through his gun sight. Doc Sullivan's hands were raw and cracked from handling ammunition. Radio Martinez suffered from lack of sleep, often having to monitor communications during brief rest periods. Despite these challenges, their performance never wavered. Thunder Road's kill count continued to climb, reaching 12 confirmed enemy vehicles by mid-August. The tank itself bore the scars of near misses and shrapnel, but remained operational thanks to the crew's meticulous maintenance. On August 16th, the company was advancing near the town of Fromental when disaster struck. A group of American P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers, mistaking the Sherman column for German tanks, swooped down in an attack run. Air attack, Robert shouted as he recognized the approaching aircraft. All units, display recognition panels. The bright orange panels, designed to identify American vehicles to friendly aircraft, were quickly deployed. But in the confusion of combat, with dust and smoke obscuring visibility, the pilots either didn't see or didn't recognize the markers. The first bombs fell among the rear elements of the column, destroying 2 Shermans instantly. As Thunder Road's crew watched in horror, the fighters came around for another pass. Everyone out, Robert ordered as bombs began falling closer. Abandon tank. The crew scrambled from their positions, diving into roadside ditches as bombs exploded around them. Thunder Road was directly hit by a 500-pound bomb that tore through its engine compartment and ignited the fuel tanks. The Sherman, their home for the past months, became an inferno of burning steel and ammunition. When the attack finally ended and the fighters departed, the company took stock of their losses. 3 tanks destroyed, 6 men killed, and 11 wounded, all by friendly fire. Thunder Road was a total loss, its blackened hull still smoking in the middle of the road. Robert gathered his shaken crew. Duke Wilson had suffered minor shrapnel wounds to his arm. Eagle-Eye Harris was dazed from a near miss that had thrown him against a tree. Doc Sullivan and Radio Martinez were physically unharmed, but visibly shaken by the sudden destruction of their tank. "We got lucky," Robert told them soberly. "Could have been much worse." He looked at the burning wreckage of Thunder Road. "We'll get a new tank at the next supply point. For now, we ride with 2nd Platoon." The loss of Thunder Road affected all of them more deeply than they cared to admit. The tank had become more than just a machine. It was a sanctuary, their home in the midst of war. Its destruction by friendly fire added a layer of bitter irony. That night, as they camped near a French village, Robert made a particularly long entry in his notebook. He documented the friendly fire incident in clinical detail, noting time, weather conditions, and recognition procedures that had failed. But he also wrote about Thunder Road itself, about the peculiar creak its suspension made when turning right, about the countless hours spent inside its steel confines, about how its destruction felt like losing a member of the crew. The next day, at a division supply point, they received a replacement tank, a newer model Sherman with the improved 76mm gun. The longer barrel and higher velocity round would give them a better chance against German armor, particularly at longer ranges. Robert supervised as the crew went over every inch of the new tank, familiarizing themselves with slight differences in layout and operation. Duke Wilson adjusted the driver's seat and tested the transmission. Eagle-Eye Harris calibrated the new gun sights and practiced traversing the turret. Doc Sullivan organized the ammunition storage, now including the more powerful 76mm rounds. Radio Martinez installed their communications equipment and tested all frequencies. When they were satisfied that the tank was ready, Robert gathered them around. "What are we calling her?" he asked. There was a moment of silence before Duke suggested, "Thunder Road 2? The others nodded in agreement, and so the new tank was christened. The name was painted on the hull, along with a freshly started tally board for enemy kills. As August drew to a close, Thunder Road 2 and Company 1 continued their eastward advance. The Germans were in retreat across France, but they fought delaying actions at key points, making the Americans pay for every mile. Near the town of Mantes-Gassicourt, they encountered a German rearguard consisting of several Panzer IVs and infantry with anti-tank weapons. Thunder Road 2 led the company in a flanking maneuver that caught the Germans by surprise, destroying 3 tanks and forcing the remainder to withdraw. It was during this engagement that Eagle-Eye Harris first demonstrated the superior performance of the 76mm gun, penetrating a Panzer IV's frontal armor at a range of 1,200 yards, a shot that would have been impossible with their previous 75mm weapon. "Now that's more like it," Harris remarked with satisfaction as they watched the German tank burn. By the end of August, the Allied forces were approaching the German border. The 3rd Armored Division had been in near-continuous combat for 2 months, advancing hundreds of miles and inflicting heavy losses on the retreating German forces. Thunder Road 2 had added 7 kills to its tally, bringing the crew's total to 19 enemy vehicles destroyed. Their reputation had spread throughout the division, with other tank crews looking to them as an example of how to fight effectively against superior German armor. On September 1st, Robert received unexpected news. Due to their exceptional combat record, he and his crew had been selected to return to the United States for a war bond tour to boost civilian morale and support for the war effort. 3 weeks stateside, then back to the front, the battalion commander explained. "Orders come straight from division. They want real combat heroes to sell bonds, and your crew fits the bill." Robert had mixed feelings about the assignment. On one hand, the prospect of a brief respite from combat was appealing. On the other, he was reluctant to leave his company in the midst of the campaign. When he informed his crew, their reactions were similarly conflicted. "Seems wrong to leave now," Duke Wilson commented, expressing what they all felt. "We've earned it," Robert replied, though without much conviction. "And it's only temporary. Besides, we can share what we've learned, maybe help save some lives when the new crews come over." As September progressed, they continued operations while awaiting their official orders to depart. The fighting had grown more intense as they approached Germany, with the retreating forces becoming increasingly desperate. On September 18th, Company A was assigned to support an infantry advance near the Belgian-German border. Thunder Road 2 led the column through a heavily wooded area, approaching the town of Munsterbusch, just south of Aachen. Robert sensed danger as they neared the town. The Germans had constructed the West Wall, also known as the Siegfried Line, as their final defensive position before German soil. Intelligence suggested that Munsterbusch was heavily fortified as part of this line. "All units, "Deploy for assault," Robert ordered as they approached the town's outskirts. "Infantry support moving up. Watch for anti-tank guns in buildings." Thunder Road 2 advanced cautiously, its crew on high alert. The 76mm gun was loaded with armor-piercing ammunition, ready for any armored threat they might encounter. As they entered the first street, Robert spotted movement in an upper window of a house ahead. "Possible hit position, 2 o'clock," he warned, directing Eagle Eye's attention to the building. Through his gun sight, Harris confirmed, "I see it. Large caliber, possibly an .88 concealed in the building." "Load he," Robert ordered, preparing to destroy the threat before it could target them. Doc Sullivan reached for a high-explosive round, but as he attempted to load it, the shell jammed in the breech mechanism. "Breech jam," he reported urgently. "Can't clear it." In that critical moment, with the gun disabled and a deadly German weapon trained on them, Robert made an instant decision. "Back up now," he shouted to Duke. "Get us out of the line of fire." Wilson threw the Sherman into reverse, but it was too late. The German gun fired, its shell striking Thunder Road 2's turret with devastating force. The impact blew Robert clear of the commander's hatch, throwing him violently to the ground as the tank continued to reverse. Dazed and in excruciating pain, Robert looked down to see his right leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood already soaking through his uniform. Through a haze of shock, he fumbled for his medical pouch, extracting a morphine syringe which he immediately injected. As the painkiller began to take effect, Robert heard a second impact as another shell struck Thunder Road 2. The tank, still in reverse, backed over a cut bank and rolled onto its side, trapping the crew inside. With the last of his strength, Robert drew his combat knife and, in an act of desperate self-preservation, attempted to cut away his mangled leg, which he instinctively knew was beyond saving. The world began to fade around him as blood loss and morphine took their toll. His last conscious thought was concern for his crew, trapped in the overturned tank. Then darkness claimed him, and the farm boy from Texas who had become one of America's greatest tank aces knew nothing more. The legacy of Captain Robert Mitchell in Thunder Road was just beginning, but at that moment, on a street in Munsterbusch, his war had come to an end. His journey would continue through rehabilitation, through peacetime, and eventually back to the army he loved. But the crucible of combat that had forged him into a legend was behind him. In 81 days of combat, his crew had destroyed 24 enemy vehicles, led the company in over 20 attacks, and demonstrated that American ingenuity and adaptability could overcome German technological superiority. The lessons he learned and later taught would influence armored warfare doctrine for decades to come, a lasting testament to a simple truth he had discovered in the fields of France and Belgium. It's not the machine that wins battles, but the men inside it. The countryside of Normandy stretched before them like a deadly chessboard. Captain Robert Mitchell stood in the commander's hatch of Thunder Road, scanning the horizon with his binoculars. The sun had just crested the distant hills, casting long shadows across the hedgerows that crisscrossed the landscape. These ancient earthen walls, topped with tangled vegetation, had transformed the once picturesque French countryside into a maze of death. "Movement, 3 o'clock, Eagle Eye Harris called up from his gunner's position. "Looks like infantry, about 800 yards. Robert adjusted his binoculars. "German rearguard, they're falling back to the next hedgerow line." He keyed his radio. "All units, enemy infantry retreating northeast. Maintain formation and continue advance." It was early July 1944, and Company Y of the 32nd Armored Regiment had been in continuous combat for nearly 2 weeks. The initial shock of battle had given way to a grim routine, punctuated by moments of intense violence. Thunder Road led the company column, its hull now bearing the scars of near misses and shrapnel impacts that told the story of their baptism by fire. Robert had developed a reputation for tactical innovation that was spreading throughout the 3rd Armored Division. His philosophy, hit and move, emphasized using the Sherman's mobility to compensate for its inferior firepower when facing German tanks. "Never stay stationary for more than 30 seconds, he constantly reminded his commanders. "Fire and relocate. Make them guess where the next shot is coming from." This approach ran counter to conventional doctrine, which often had tanks deploying in static positions to support infantry. But Robert had witnessed too many Shermans destroyed by German anti-tank guns to follow that playbook blindly. Colonel Richardson had taken notice of these departures from standard tactics, but had chosen to let Robert continue. Results spoke for themselves. Company I had destroyed 17 enemy vehicles in the past 2 weeks while losing only 2 Shermans, a remarkable exchange rate on the brutal Normandy battlefield. As Thunder Road crested a small rise, Robert spotted the telltale dust cloud of moving vehicles about a mile ahead. He instantly dropped down into the turret. Contact front. Armored vehicles moving left to right across our advance. Duke, halt here. Hold down behind this rise. Wilson expertly positioned the tank so that only the turret was exposed above the gentle slope. Robert used his binoculars to assess the threat. 2 Panzer IVs and several half-tracks. They're withdrawing but don't know we're here. He turned to Harris. Eagle, can you get a shot from here? Harris peered through his gun sight, calculating range and deflection. Affirmative. Lead Panzer at 1,000 yards. I can take him. Load armor piercing, Robert ordered, and Doc Sullivan smoothly slid around into the breach. AP loaded, Sullivan confirmed. Send it, Robert commanded. Thunder Road's 75mm gun roared in the morning stillness, the shell arcing toward the unsuspecting German tank. Through his binoculars, Robert watched the round strike the Panzer IV's turret, penetrating the relatively thin armor. A moment later, flames erupted from the hatches as the German crew attempted to escape. Target hit, Harris reported calmly. Brewing up. Shift to the 2nd Panzer, Robert ordered. Martinez, inform the company to remain in position. Let them come to us. The surviving German vehicles halted, their commanders trying to identify the source of the attack. The 2nd Panzer IV began to traverse its turret, searching for the hidden threat. Harris had already aligned his next shot. Target acquired. Fire when ready. Again, the Sherman's gun thundered, sending another armor-piercing round downrange. This time the shell struck the Panzer's side armor as it turned, creating a spectacular explosion as ammunition cooked off inside. Target destroyed, Harris reported, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from his voice. The German half-tracks were now retreating in disorder, having lost both their armored protection. Robert considered pursuing but decided against it. Too exposed if there are anti-tank guns covering their withdrawal, he explained to his crew. We've accomplished what we needed here. That evening, as the company established a defensive perimeter for the night, Robert called his platoon leaders together. Using a stick, he drew in the dirt, illustrating a new formation he wanted to implement. The Germans expect us to attack in column or on line, he explained. We're going to use a wedge formation instead. Lead tank here, 2 tanks flanking 20 yards back, 2 more covering the rear corners. Gives us all-round protection and maximum firepower in any direction. Lieutenant Adams, a recent West Point graduate, looked skeptical. That's not in the manual, sir. The Germans don't read our manuals, Lieutenant, Robert replied with a slight smile. They're adapting to our standard tactics, so we need to surprise them with something new. Over the next days, Robert refined and tested his wedge formation in several engagements. The results were impressive, allowing the company to respond quickly to threats from any direction while maintaining forward momentum. Other company commanders began to take notice, sending observers to study the technique. Colonel Richardson visited the front lines to see for himself. He found Robert beside Thunder Road, supervising maintenance as the crew performed their daily checks. Interesting formation you've developed, Mitchell, Richardson commented without preamble. Robert straightened to attention. Adapting to the terrain and enemy tactics, sir. Richardson nodded thoughtfully. General Rose has taken an interest in your methods. Kill ratio is twice the division average. He paused. Some of the staff officers think you're being reckless. With respect, sir, I believe being predictable is more dangerous than being unconventional. The colonel smiled slightly. I tend to agree. Carry on, Captain. Just try not to rewrite the entire tactical manual before the war is over. As July progressed, Thunder Road's reputation continued to grow. The crew had developed a level of coordination that seemed almost supernatural to outside observers. Each man anticipated the other's needs, resulting in a fighting efficiency that was unmatched in the battalion. Duke Wilson could maneuver the 30-ton Sherman with the precision of a surgeon, often positioning the tank perfectly for a shot without being told. Eagle Eye Harris had developed an uncanny ability to identify German vehicles at extreme ranges, even through smoke and dust. Doc Sullivan had reduced his loading time to 4 seconds, a full second faster than the standard. Radio Martinez maintained crystal-clear communications even in the chaos of battle and kept Robert informed of the bigger picture beyond their immediate fight. Robert pushed them relentlessly, demanding perfection in maintenance, gunnery, and tactics. Clean your gun before you clean your mess kit, became the company motto, emphasizing that proper care of their equipment took precedence over personal comfort. This attention to detail paid dividends. While other tanks frequently broke down during advances, Thunder Road remained operational through the grueling summer campaign. Their kill count continued to rise, reaching 9 confirmed enemy vehicles by the end of July. The bond between the crew transcended professional respect. They had become a family, united by shared danger in the intimate confines of their steel home. Each man knew the other's stories, hopes, and fears. Duke Wilson, at 40, was the oldest. A former race car driver from Kentucky, he had joined the Army after his brother was killed at Pearl Harbor. He carried a photo of his brother in his wallet and touched it before every engagement, a private ritual no one mentioned but everyone respected. Eagle Eye Harris, 25, had been a hunting guide in Montana before the war. His father had taught him to shoot when he was 8 years old, and he often claimed he could see the wind. His incredible accuracy with the Sherman's main gun gave credence to this boast. Doc Sullivan had abandoned medical school at Harvard to enlist after Pearl Harbor, feeling that healing could wait while the world was on fire. He carried a small medical kit everywhere and served as the crew's unofficial doctor, treating everything from blisters to shrapnel wounds. Radio Martinez, the youngest at 22, had been a radio operator for a small station in New Mexico. The son of Mexican immigrants, he had enlisted to prove his patriotism. His technical knowledge kept Thunder Road connected to the larger battle, and his quick wit maintained morale during the darkest moments. And leading them was Robert Mitchell, the Texas farmer who had found his true calling in the chaos of war. He drove them hard but never asked more than he himself was willing to give. His tactical intuition had become legendary, with other tank commanders seeking his advice before difficult operations. In early August, as the Allied breakout from Normandy gathered momentum, Company Y was assigned to support an infantry assault on a small town near Morton. Intelligence suggested light resistance, but as Thunder Road approached the outskirts, Robert sensed an ambush. "Something's not right," he muttered, scanning the seemingly deserted buildings. "Duke, halt here. All units hold position." Robert studied the town through his binoculars, noting the unnatural stillness. No civilians, no movement, not even birds in the trees. Then he spotted it, the almost imperceptible barrel of an anti-tank gun protruding from a barn window. "Enemy at gun, 11 o'clock, second story of the Red Barn," he reported calmly. "Eagle, can you see it?" Harris adjusted his sight. "Got it. Range 600 yards. He round. Take out that entire corner of the building." The high explosive shell demolished the corner of the barn, revealing not one but 3 well-camouflaged anti-tank guns that had been waiting to ambush the American column. The infantry moved forward to clear the position, finding a carefully prepared killing zone that would have decimated the company had they advanced blindly. Later that day, a correspondent from Stars and Stripes interviewed Robert about the incident. "How did you spot those guns when no one else could?" the reporter asked. Robert shrugged. "Experience. The town was too quiet. Germans aren't in the habit of abandoning defensible positions without a fight." The resulting article, titled "Tanker's Sixth Sense Saves Lives," was published throughout the European theater, further enhancing Thunder Road's legendary status. Robert was uncomfortable with the attention, but recognized its value for morale. As Operation Cobra succeeded and the German lines collapsed, the pace of the advance accelerated. The 3rd Armored Division, true to its spearhead nickname, led the charge eastward, sometimes covering 30 miles in a day. Thunder Road was often at the vanguard, Robert standing in the commander's hatch despite the danger, needing the unobstructed view to make tactical decisions. The relentless pace took its toll on men and machines. Tank tracks wore out and needed replacement. Engines required constant maintenance after long marches on dusty roads. The crew operated on minimal sleep, catnapping in shifts whenever the column halted. Physical discomforts mounted. The Sherman's interior often reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit, with engine heat, gun blasts, and summer temperatures combining to create an almost unbearable environment. The smell of sweat, cordite, oil, and exhaust filled their nostrils until they barely noticed it anymore. The constant vibration and noise left them with perpetual headaches and ringing ears. Yet through it all, Thunder Road performed. By mid-August, their kill tally had reached 12, including Panzer IVs, assault guns, and numerous half-tracks. They had survived near misses, artillery barrages, and infantry close assaults, emerging each time to fight again. Then came the friendly fire incident near Fromental that destroyed the original Thunder Road, a loss that affected the crew more deeply than they would admit. The replacement tank, Thunder Road 2, with its upgraded 76mm gun, was a superior fighting machine, but it lacked the familiar quirks and character of their first home. She doesn't creak the same way on right turns, Duke Wilson commented, as they worked to break in the new tank. The old girl would complain when you pushed her too hard. This one's too quiet. Better gun, though, Eagle Eye noted, appreciating the 76mm superior penetration against German armor. We'll make her our own, Robert assured them. Every tank has its personality. We just need to find this one's. Chapter 6, Warriors and Weapons. By late August 1904, the Allied forces were advancing rapidly across France. The 3rd Armored Division had penetrated deep into territory that had been under German control for 4 years, liberating towns and villages whose inhabitants greeted the Americans with flowers, wine, and tears of joy. For the crew of Thunder Road 2, these moments of celebration provided brief respite from the grinding reality of combat. The new tank, with its more powerful 76mm gun, had proven its worth in several engagements against German armor, but the fundamental vulnerabilities of the Sherman remained. The problem isn't just firepower, Robert explained to his platoon leaders during a maintenance halt. It's the high profile. We're too tall, too visible. German tanks sit lower to the ground, making them harder to spot and hit. He had gathered them around Thunder Road 2, using it to illustrate his points. The Sherman stood nearly 9 feet tall, its silhouette impossible to miss on open ground. We have to use terrain to compensate, he continued. Hold down positions whenever possible. Use reverse slopes, and most importantly, keep moving. A stationary Sherman is a dead Sherman. The men listened attentively, knowing that Mitchell's tactics had kept Company 101's casualties lower than any other tank company in the regiment. His emphasis on maintenance had also paid dividends, with fewer mechanical breakdowns during critical advances. One more thing, Robert added. The Germans are deploying more infantry with Panzerfausts. Their effective range is only about 60 yards, but they'll penetrate our side armor easily. Keep infantry support close and watch the buildings when moving through towns. The Panzerfaust, a single-use German anti-tank weapon, had become an increasing threat as the Germans adapted to American armored tactics. A single infantryman with good nerves could destroy a Sherman by allowing it to pass and then targeting its thinner side or rear armor. That afternoon, as Thunder Road 2 led the company toward the town of Sens, they encountered the reality of this threat. The column was moving through a narrow country lane when a Panzerfaust rocket streaked from a hedgerow, barely missing the turret. "Contact right!" Robert shouted. "Infantry with 8 weapons!" Duke Wilson immediately executed an evasive maneuver, backing the tank while turning to present the frontal armor toward the threat. Eagle Eye Harris traversed the turret, firing a high-explosive round into the hedgerow where the rocket had originated. The company's infantry support moved up to clear the position, finding 3 dead German soldiers and several abandoned Panzerfausts. The close call emphasized the vulnerability of tanks without proper infantry screens. Later that evening, as the company established a defensive perimeter, Robert discussed the incident with his crew. They sat in a circle beside Thunder Road 2, cleaning weapons and performing maintenance while sharing a rare hot meal. "We got lucky today," Robert acknowledged. "That Panzerfaust missed by inches." "German kid couldn't have been more than 16, Duke commented. "His hands were probably shaking too much to aim properly." "They're sending younger ones to the front now," Doc Sullivan added. "Saw a bunch of prisoners yesterday. Half of them look like they should be in high school." Eagle Eye Harris remained focused on the technical aspect. "That 76 makes a difference. Took out a Panther at 200 yards yesterday. The old 75 wouldn't have scratched it at that range." Robert nodded, appreciating Harris's point. The upgraded gun had indeed improved their combat effectiveness, but he remained concerned about the Sherman's fundamental design limitations. "The armor's still too thin," he noted. "Frontal plate is only 76mm thick, and it's not sloped enough. Tiger can penetrate us at over 2,000 yards, while we need to get within 600 yards for a frontal kill shot, even with the 76. So we keep using your tactics," Radio Martinez concluded. "Hit them from the sides and rear. Never fight fair." "Exactly," Robert agreed. "In a tank battle, fighting fair gets you killed." As the campaign progressed, Robert continued to refine his tactical approach. He developed a maneuver the company called the Mitchell pivot, where a platoon of tanks would appear to retreat from a superior force, then suddenly pivot in unison to deliver concentrated fire from an unexpected direction. This tactic proved devastatingly effective near the town of Vitry-le-François, where 3 Shermans, including Thunder Road 2, destroyed a pair of Panthers that had been pursuing what they thought was a defeated American unit. The German tank commanders are getting overconfident, Robert observed after the engagement. They believe their technical superiority guarantees victory. That's a weakness we can exploit. By the end of August, Thunder Road 2 had added 7 more kills to the crew's tally, bringing their total to 19 enemy vehicles destroyed. Their reputation had spread throughout the division, with other tank commanders adopting Mitchell's methods to improve their own survival odds. Life inside a Sherman tank during extended combat operations was an experience few civilians could comprehend. The 5 crew members occupied a space roughly the size of a small bathroom, surrounded by ammunition, equipment, and machinery that could kill them if damaged by enemy fire. The driver, Duke Wilson, sat in the front left of the hull, peering through a small vision port that limited his visibility to what was directly ahead. In combat, he often had to drive with the port closed, navigating solely on instructions from Robert above. The bowgunner position had been eliminated in Thunder Road 2 to make room for additional ammunition, a modification Robert had requested based on combat experience. The 76mm gun required more storage space, and the bow machine gun had proven less effective than the coaxial and top-mounted weapons. The gunner, Eagle Eye Harris, sat in the left side of the turret, his right eye perpetually pressed to the gun sight. His world narrowed to a small circle of magnified terrain, searching constantly for the distinctive shapes of German armor. The loader, Doc Sullivan, occupied the right side of the turret, surrounded by ammunition racks. His job demanded strength and speed, hefting the 15-pound shells into the breech while avoiding the recoiling gun mechanism that could crush his arms if he mistimed his movements. The radio operator, Radio Martinez, sat in the right front hull, managing communications while also serving as assistant driver and secondary machine gunner when needed. His position was perhaps the most isolated, cut off from direct observation of the battlefield. And above them all, often standing in the commander's hatch despite the danger, was Robert Mitchell. His position offered the only comprehensive view of the battlefield, but also made him the most exposed to enemy fire, shrapnel, and snipers. The physical conditions were brutal. Summer temperatures turned the tank's interior into an oven. The noise was deafening, a constant cacophony of engine roar, track clatter, gun blasts, and radio chatter that made normal conversation impossible. Hand signals and shouted phrases became the primary means of communication. The smell was perhaps the worst aspect, a noxious blend of exhaust fumes, cordite, sweat, oil, and the ever-present fear that seeped from their pores during combat. They carried spare clothing in waterproof bags strapped to the exterior storage, changing whenever possible to combat the worst of the filth. Food was consumed cold more often than not, usually sea rations eaten in shifts because there wasn't room for all 5 men to eat simultaneously inside the tank. Water was precious and rationed carefully, with each man allotted a canteen per day for all needs. Sleep came in brief snatches whenever the tank wasn't moving or in combat. The crew developed the ability to fall asleep instantly when given the chance, a survival mechanism born of chronic exhaustion. They slept in their positions or beneath the tank when halted, never far from their metal home. Despite these hardships, or perhaps because of them, the bond between the crew strengthened into something transcending normal military camaraderie. They functioned as a single organism, each man anticipating the other's needs, covering weaknesses, maximizing strengths. In early September, as the Allied forces approached the German border, Robert received notification that he and his crew had been selected for a war bond tour in the United States, based on their combat record and Thunder Road's growing fame. 3 weeks stateside, then back to the front, the battalion commander explained. You'll depart on September 22nd. Until then, continue normal operations. The news brought mixed emotions. The prospect of clean beds, hot food, and safety was undeniably appealing after months of continuous combat. Yet there was also reluctance to leave their company in the midst of what might be the war's decisive campaign. Feels wrong, Duke Wilson commented when Robert shared the news, like we're abandoning the others. It's not our choice, Robert reminded him. Besides, we'll be helping the war effort in a different way. And we'll be back before the final push into Germany. In the days that followed, operations continued with increasing intensity. The Germans were fighting desperately now, defending the approaches to their homeland with fanatical determination. Older men and boys were being pressed into service, but they were mixed with hardened veterans who knew how to maximize the defensive terrain. On September 11th, Thunder Road 2 was leading the company toward the Moselle River when they encountered a German rearguard consisting of a Panzer IV and supporting infantry. Eagle Eye Harris spotted the tank partially concealed behind a stone wall at the edge of a small village. Panzer IV, 1 o'clock, range 900 yards, he reported, already swinging the turret. AP round, Robert ordered calmly. Sullivan? AP loaded, Doc confirmed, having anticipated the command. Fire when ready, Robert instructed, and Harris squeezed the trigger. The 76mm gun roared, its shells striking the Panzer's turret at an angle that would have deflected a 75mm round. But the higher velocity 76mm penetrated, setting off an ammunition fire that forced the German crew to abandon their vehicle. Target mobility kill, Harris reported, crew bailing out. Machine gun, Robert ordered, and Martinez opened fire with the coaxial 30 caliber, cutting down the fleeing Germans before they could reach cover. The supporting infantry scattered, demoralized by the loss of their armored protection. The company secured the village without further resistance, finding it mostly abandoned except for a few elderly residents who had been unable to flee. An old Frenchman approached Thunder Road 2 as the crew performed a maintenance check. He was stooped with age but carried himself with dignity, his weathered face bearing witness to years of German occupation. Merci, he said simply, touching the tank's hull with a gnarled hand. Merci beaucoup. Robert, who spoke passable French from his high school days, conversed briefly with the man. He learned that the village had endured 4 years of harsh occupation, with food confiscation, forced labor, and summary executions for any sign of resistance. Tell him we're going all the way to Berlin, Duke suggested when Robert translated. Tell him it'll be over soon. Robert relayed the message, and the old man nodded, tears forming in his eyes. Dieu vous bénisse, he replied. God bless you. That evening, Robert made a lengthy entry in his notebook, not about tactics or equipment for once, but about the human cost of the war. He described the old Frenchman's hands, how they had trembled as they touched Thunder Road 2, how the simple act of liberation had meant more to that village than all the strategic objectives on the division's maps. As mid-September approached, the company entered Belgium, pushing toward the German border. The terrain was becoming more challenging, with dense forests, steep hills, and narrow valleys that restricted tank movement and created perfect ambush conditions. On September 14th, Thunder Road 2 was supporting an infantry attack near the town of Namur when they encountered their most difficult fight to date. The German defenders had positioned several anti-tank guns with interlocking fields of fire, concealed in the dense forest that bordered the main approach road. The lead tank in the column was hit and disabled before the Americans realized they had driven into a trap. Robert immediately ordered the company to deploy into the defensive formation he had developed, creating a protective circle around the infantry. Enemy at guns, multiple positions in the tree line, he reported over the radio. Hold position and identify targets before advancing. Thunder Road 2 took up position behind a small rise with only the turret exposed. Eagle Eye Harris methodically scanned the forest edge, looking for the telltale signs of concealed guns. Muzzle flash, 2 o'clock, he suddenly called out as one of the German guns fired at another Sherman. Identified, Robert confirmed. He round, target that position. The 76mm gun roared, sending a high explosive shell into the trees. The round detonated among the gun crew, silencing the position. For the next hour, the company engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the German anti-tank screen. One by one, Thunder Road 2 identified and destroyed the hidden guns, allowing the infantry to advance and secure the area. When the smoke cleared, they had neutralized 6 anti-tank guns and several machine gun nests, capturing or killing over 30 German soldiers. 2 Shermans had been lost, with 4 crewmen killed and 3 wounded, but the position had been secured. That evening, Colonel Richardson arrived to assess the situation. He found Robert studying a map by flashlight, planning the next day's advance. Impressive work today, Mitchell, Richardson commented. 6 at guns is a hell of a score. We got lucky, sir, Robert replied modestly. They were well positioned but poorly coordinated. If they'd fired simultaneously instead of picking individual targets, we'd have lost more tanks. Richardson nodded, acknowledging the tactical assessment. That's why I'm here. Division wants your perspective on these defensive tactics we're encountering. The Germans are clearly changing their approach as we near their border. For the next hour, Robert detailed his observations on German defensive methods, the increasing use of prepared positions, and the changing mix of veteran and inexperienced troops. His analytical mind had cataloged patterns that others had missed, identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited. They're running short on experienced tank crews, he explained. The Panthers and Tigers we're encountering are technically superior, but often tactically inferior. Their commanders make rookie mistakes, exposing side armor, halting in the open. Veterans wouldn't make those errors. That matches our intelligence, Richardson confirmed. They're pulling instructors from training schools, putting old men and boys into the line units. One more thing, Robert added. We're seeing more infantry with portable AT weapons. Panzerfaust, Panzerschrecks. They're adapting to our numerical superiority in armor by equipping every infantry squad to take out tanks. This observation particularly concerned Richardson. That could be a problem when we push into Germany, urban fighting with thousands of AT weapons in civilian hands. We'll need more infantry support, Robert concluded, and we'll need to adapt our tactics again. Less open formation, more mutual protection. As Richardson prepared to leave, he handed Robert an envelope. Your official orders for the war bond tour. You'll report to Cherbourg on the 22nd for transport back to the States. Robert took the envelope with mixed feelings. Thank you, sir. You've earned it, Mitchell, and frankly, you and your crew could use the break. You've been at the tip of the spear since Normandy. Chapter 7, The Cost of Courage. As September 1944 progressed, the Allied advance continued to push eastward, approaching the formidable Siegfried Line, Germany's western defensive barrier. The 3rd Armored Division, including Company 1 in Thunder Road 2, had been at the forefront of this relentless drive across France and Belgium. The cumulative strain of 80 consecutive days in combat was becoming evident in every man. Duke Wilson's persistent cough had worsened from constant exposure to engine fumes. Eagle Eye Harris suffered from eye strain and headaches after thousands of hours peering through his gun sight. Doc Sullivan's hands were raw and cracked from handling ammunition and hot shell casings. Radio Martinez had developed a nervous twitch whenever the radio crackled with urgent messages. And Robert Mitchell, though he tried to hide it, was experiencing the early symptoms of combat fatigue, with difficulty sleeping and momentary lapses in concentration. Yet Thunder Road 2 continued to perform at an exceptional level. The crew's kill count had reached 24 enemy vehicles, a record unmatched in the division. Their methods had been studied and adopted throughout the armored units, saving countless American lives. The crew's reputation had grown to near mythical proportions. Infantry units specifically requested to operate with Mitchell's Marauders, knowing that Thunder Road 2 would provide dependable fire support regardless of the situation. New replacement tankers arrived at the front, having already heard stories of the crew's exploits. On September 18th, the company was advancing toward the German border near the town of Aachen. Intelligence suggested they would encounter elements of the Siegfried Line, a series of reinforced concrete fortifications, tank traps, and minefields designed to halt any invasion of German territory. The morning briefing was tense, with all officers aware of the challenges ahead. The battalion commander spread a map across the hood of his Jeep, indicating their objective. The town of Munsterbusch, just south of Aachen, he explained. It's a key access point through the Siegfried Line. We expect heavy resistance, including fixed anti-tank positions, minefields, and possibly local counterattacks by armor. He looked directly at Robert. Company I will lead the advance, with Thunder Road 2 at point. Your experience with identifying concealed AT positions will be crucial. The infantry will follow closely to clear buildings and bunkers. Robert studied the map intently, noting the terrain features and likely defensive positions. We'll need engineer support for any minefields, he observed. Already arranged, the commander confirmed. They'll be directly behind your lead element. After the briefing, Robert gathered his crew around Thunder Road 2 for a final maintenance check and tactical review. The tank was battle-scarred but meticulously maintained, its mechanical systems functioning perfectly despite the months of hard use. This will be different from previous engagements, Robert warned them. The Siegfried Line is purpose-built to stop tanks. Expect concrete dragon's teeth anti-tank obstacles, ditches, and mines. Buildings will be fortified and integrated into the defensive network. Sounds like a warm welcome to Germany, Duke Wilson commented dryly, checking the track tension one last time. We stick to what's worked for us, Robert continued. Identify threats before they can target us. Use terrain for cover, short halts only, and keep the infantry close to deal with 8 teams. Eagle Eye Harris was calibrating his gun sight as always before a major engagement. Heard we might face king tigers, he mentioned. Any truth to that? I... Robert considered the intelligence he'd received. Possible but unlikely in this sector. They're concentrating the heaviest armor around Arnhem, where the British are pushing. But if we do encounter them, remember they're even more undergunned and undermanned than the regular Tigers. Experienced crews are in short supply. The King Tiger, or Tiger II, was Germany's newest and heaviest tank, weighing in at nearly 70 tons, with armor that no Allied tank gun could penetrate frontally. But they were mechanically unreliable and consumed enormous amounts of fuel, limiting their tactical mobility. One more thing, Robert added, his tone growing serious. This may be our last major engagement before the war bond tour. Let's make sure we all come through it. The men nodded solemnly, each aware of the cruel irony that had befallen other crews selected for similar honors, only to be killed or wounded before they could depart. In the superstitious world of tank warfare, mentioning their upcoming respite was almost taboo, as if fate might be listening and take offense. The column moved out at 0800 hours, advancing cautiously toward Munsterbusch. The weather was overcast with occasional drizzle, limiting visibility and making the narrow road slick with mud. Thunder Road 2 led the way, Robert standing in the commander's hatch despite the rain, needing the unobstructed view to identify threats. As they approached the outskirts of the town, the column halted while reconnaissance elements moved forward to probe the defenses. Robert used his binoculars to study the buildings ahead, looking for the telltale signs of fortification or concealed weapons. The town appeared deserted, its stone buildings showing the scars of previous artillery bombardment. The street layout was simple, a main road running through the center with smaller lanes branching off at regular intervals. Perfect for defense, with multiple interlocking fields of fire. I don't like it, Robert muttered. Too quiet. The reconnaissance team reported no immediate signs of resistance, but Robert remained suspicious. The Germans were too tactically sound to leave such an important position undefended. Advance slowly, he ordered over the radio. All units maintain spacing and prepare for contact. Thunder Road 2 moved forward at walking pace, its engine throttled back to reduce noise. Duke Wilson guided the 30-ton vehicle carefully, avoiding debris that might conceal mines or improvised traps. They were halfway down the main street when Robert spotted a subtle anomaly. One building, a 3-story structure that might once have been a small hotel, had its windows intact on the upper floor, while the surrounding buildings showed extensive damage. Building on the right, 3rd floor, he said to Harris. Something's not right there. Eagle Eye traversed the turret slightly, examining the structure through his periscope. Windows are covered from inside, he reported. Could be an observation post. As Robert continued to study the building, he caught a brief glint of metal from an upper window. His combat instincts, honed by months of battlefield experience, triggered an immediate alarm. Anti-tank gun, 3 o'clock, 3rd floor window, he shouted. High caliber, possibly an 8. Identified, Harris confirmed, swinging the turret to face the threat. Load he, Robert ordered, and Sullivan reached for a high explosive round. But as Sullivan attempted to load the shell, it jammed in the breech mechanism. Breech jam, he reported urgently. Can't clear it. In that critical moment, with the main gun disabled and a deadly German weapon aimed directly at them, Robert made a split-second decision. Back up now, he shouted to Duke. Get us out of the line of fire. Wilson threw the Sherman into reverse, but it was too late. The German gun fired, its high-velocity shell striking Thunder Road 2's turret with devastating force. The impact blew Robert clear of the commander's hatch, throwing him violently to the ground as the tank continued to reverse. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Robert hit the cobblestone street. His right leg exploded in pain, and looking down, he saw it was twisted at an unnatural angle, blood already soaking through his uniform. The white gleam of exposed bone protruded from his shattered knee. Through a haze of shock, Robert fumbled for his medical pouch, extracting a morphine syringe which he immediately injected into his thigh. As the painkiller began to take effect, he became aware of the continued battle around him. Thunder Road 2 had reversed blindly without his guidance, and he watched in horror as the tank backed over a steep-cut bank at the edge of the street. The 30-ton vehicle teetered for a moment, then rolled onto its side with a thunderous crash, trapping the crew inside. With the last of his strength, Robert drew his combat knife and, in an act of desperate self-preservation, attempted to cut through his uniform to reach the mangled limb. He knew from battlefield medicine that a tourniquet was needed immediately to prevent fatal blood loss, but his movements were becoming uncoordinated as shock and morphine took effect. The world began to fade around him as blood pooled on the cobblestones beneath his body. His last conscious thought was concern for his crew, trapped in the overturned Thunder Road 2. Then darkness claimed him, and the farm boy from Texas, who had become one of America's greatest tank commanders, knew nothing more. The battle for Munsterbusch continued to rage around Robert's unconscious form. Lieutenant Colonel Richardson, who had come forward to observe the breakthrough operation, witnessed Thunder Road 2's destruction and immediately took charge of the situation. Racing forward under fire, Richardson reached Robert's side, quickly assessed his injuries, and administered another dose of morphine. He then applied a tourniquet to the shattered leg, stemming the life-threatening blood loss. "Medic!" Richardson shouted, waving frantically to the aidmen following the infantry. "Captain down!" Two medics reached them moments later, quickly stabilizing Robert and preparing him for evacuation. As they worked, Richardson organized a team to rescue the crew trapped in the overturned tank. Thunder Road 2 lay on its side, smoke pouring from the engine compartment. The main hatch was crushed against the ground, but the loader's hatch on the turret roof was accessible. Infantry soldiers and engineers worked frantically to open it, aware that fire could engulf the tank at any moment. When they finally pried the hatch open, Duke Wilson emerged first, bleeding from a head wound, but able to move under his own power. He helped extract Eagle Eye Harris, who was unconscious with a probable concussion. Doc Sullivan followed, his left arm clearly broken, but otherwise intact. Radio Martinez was the last out, suffering from smoke inhalation, but without serious injury. As the crewmen received emergency treatment, the battle for Munsterbusch intensified. The Germans had prepared a sophisticated defense in depth, with multiple anti-tank guns covering all approaches and infantry teams armed with Panzerfausts in the buildings. The loss of Thunder Road 2 and its experienced commander was a serious blow to the American attack. Lieutenant Adams took command of Company 1, reorganizing the assault along more conventional lines, but lacking Robert's tactical insight and leadership presence. The fighting continued throughout the day, with the Americans slowly gaining ground at heavy cost. By nightfall, they had secured approximately half the town, establishing a defensive perimeter to continue the assault the next morning. Meanwhile, Robert Mitchell and his wounded crewmen had been evacuated to a field hospital 10 miles behind the front lines. Robert underwent emergency surgery to assess and treat his shattered leg, but the prognosis was grim. The bone was splintered beyond repair, with severe damage to blood vessels and nerves. The surgeon, a veteran of 3 years on the front, made the difficult but necessary decision to amputate the right leg above the knee. The procedure, performed under battlefield conditions, saved Robert's life, but forever altered its course. In the recovery area, still under anesthesia, Robert was unaware of the amputation or the fate of his crew. His war was over, but his journey of recovery and adaptation was just beginning. The next day, as fighting resumed in Munsterbusch, Colonel Richardson visited the field hospital to check on Robert and his crew. He found Duke Wilson sitting beside Robert's bed, his own head bandaged, but otherwise alert. "How is he?" Richardson asked quietly. "Still unconscious," Wilson replied. "Doc says they had to take the leg. Too much damage to save it." Richardson nodded grimly. "And the others?" "Harris has a severe concussion but should recover. Sullivan's arm is broken in 2 places. Martinez got the lightest with just smoke inhalation. They're all in the next ward." Richardson placed a hand on Robert's shoulder, though the unconscious man couldn't feel it. "I've put all of you in for Bronze Stars," he said. "Mitchell's getting a Silver Star and Purple Heart. 24 enemy vehicles destroyed in 81 days of continuous combat. That's a record that'll stand for a long time." Wilson looked up in the colonel, his weathered face showing the strain of the past months. "What happens to us now, sir?" "You'll all be evacuated to England, then back to the States once you're stable. The war bond tour is obviously canceled, but you've done more than your share already." After Richardson left, Wilson remained at Robert's bedside, maintaining a silent vigil over his commander and friend. The bond forged in the crucible of combat transcended military hierarchy, creating a brotherhood that would endure long after the guns fell silent. In the coming days, Robert would begin to face the reality of his injury and the long road to recovery that lay ahead. The farm boy from Texas had been transformed first into a warrior, and now would be transformed again by the wounds of war. But the qualities that had made him an exceptional tank commander, determination, adaptability, and unflinching courage would serve him equally well in the challenges to come. The legacy of Thunder Road and its crew had been written in the fields of France and Belgium, a testament to American ingenuity and fighting spirit in the face of superior enemy technology. They had proven that it was not the quality of the tank that ultimately determined success in battle, but the quality of the men inside it. For Captain Robert Mitchell, the war ended on September 18, 1944, in a small Belgian town most Americans would never hear of. But his influence on armored warfare tactics, his leadership example, and the lives he had saved through his innovations would continue to ripple through the U.S. Army long after the guns of World War II fell silent. Belgium, September 1944. The field hospital bustled with frantic activity as medics and surgeons worked tirelessly to save the wounded from the Battle of Munsterbusch. In a corner of the post-operative ward, Captain Robert Mitchell lay unconscious, his body fighting the dual shock of trauma and surgery. The regimental surgeon, Major Howard Phillips, checked Robert's vital signs with a practiced eye. The amputation had been necessary, the right leg too shattered by the anti-tank shell to salvage. But the captain had lost a dangerous amount of blood before reaching the field hospital. "How's he doing, Doc?" Duke Wilson asked, his own head bandaged from injuries sustained when Thunder Road 2 overturned. Phillips sighed. "Critical but stable. Next 24 hours will tell." He looked at Wilson with professional detachment. "You should be resting yourself, Sergeant." "I'll rest when he wakes up," Wilson replied stubbornly, settling back into the chair beside Robert's bed. Phillips nodded, understanding the bond between tank crews. "Call me if there's any change." Throughout that night, Wilson maintained his vigil, occasionally joined by the other crew members as they were able. Eagle Eye Harris still suffered from severe concussion symptoms, but insisted on being wheeled in to see his commander. Doc Sullivan, his broken arm in a cast, spelled Wilson for brief periods. Radio Martinez, recovering from smoke inhalation, brought coffee and news from the front. "They've secured most of Munsterbusch," Martinez reported in a raspy voice. "But it cost us. 3 more tanks lost yesterday." Wilson nodded grimly. Without the captain's tactics, they're falling back on standard doctrine. Germans know how to counter that. In the early hours of the morning, Robert began to stir. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening as consciousness returned. Wilson leaned forward, relief washing over his weathered face. "Welcome back, Captain." Robert's throat was parched, his voice barely a whisper. "The crew?" "All alive," Wilson assured him. "Banged up but intact." "The tank?" Wilson hesitated. "Total loss. Caught fire after we were extracted." Robert processed this information slowly, his mind still foggy from morphine and trauma. Then, inevitably, his gaze shifted toward the foot of the bed, sensing something wrong with his body. "My leg," he said flatly, seeing the disturbing flatness of the blanket where his right leg should have been. "They couldn't save it, Captain. Too much damage." Wilson spoke gently but directly, knowing Robert wouldn't want the truth softened. Robert closed his eyes, absorbing the reality of his situation. When he opened them again, they held a clarity that surprised Wilson. "Water?" As Wilson helped him drink, Robert's tactical mind was already assessing his new circumstances, adapting as he had taught his men to adapt on the battlefield. The war, for him at least, was over. But survival, that battle was just beginning. Over the next few days, Robert's condition stabilized enough for transfer to a larger hospital in England. The pain was constant, a burning sensation from a limb that no longer existed. The doctors called it phantom pain, a cruel trick of the nervous system that made the absence feel more acute. Colonel Richardson visited before the transfer, bringing the formal paperwork for Robert's Silver Star and Purple Heart. 24 enemy vehicles in 81 days, Richardson said, placing the citations on the bedside table, a record that will stand for a long time. "The men deserve most of the credit," Robert replied, his voice stronger, but his face gaunt from pain and weight loss. Richardson nodded. "They'll all receive Bronze Stars, but they'll tell you the same thing. Your leadership made the difference." He paused, uncomfortable with the emotional weight of the moment. "The division is implementing your tactical innovations across all armored units. Your methods are saving lives, Mitchell." "Good," Robert said simply. "That matters more than any medal." As Richardson prepared to leave, he hesitated, then spoke with the uncharacteristic emotion. "I've recommended you for promotion to major. It'll come through while you're recovering." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. You earned it." Richardson straightened, military bearing reasserting itself. "Heal up, Major. The Army will still need men like you when this war ends. The journey to England was a blur of pain medication and fitful sleep. Robert was transferred to a specialized hospital outside London that dealt specifically with amputees. There, he began to confront the full reality of his new circumstances. The physical pain was constant but manageable with medication. The psychological adjustment proved more challenging. Robert, who had always defined himself through action and capability, struggled with his new limitations and dependence on others. It's normal to experience depression, anger, even denial, the hospital psychiatrist explained during their first session. You've suffered a profound loss. I'm alive, Robert replied flatly. Many aren't. I understand the mathematics of war, doctor. Understanding intellectually is different from accepting emotionally, the psychiatrist countered. Allow yourself to grieve, Captain. It's part of healing. Robert resisted these sessions initially, viewing them as unnecessary compared to the physical rehabilitation. But as weeks passed, he reluctantly recognized their value, especially as he witnessed other wounded soldiers struggling with deeper psychological traumas. In early October, Robert received his first visitors from Thunder Road's crew. Duke Wilson and Radio Martinez had been cleared for limited duty and came bearing news from the front. The advance has slowed, Wilson reported. Siegfried Line is proving tough to crack, and the weather's turning against us. Company I is still in the line, but they've taken heavy losses. Robert absorbed this information with professional detachment, though inwardly he felt the pull of responsibility, wishing he could still be leading his men. How are the others? He asked. Harris is still battling headaches but improving. They've shipped him to a hospital in Scotland, Martinez explained. Sullivan's arm is healing well. He's actually helping out in the ward here in London. Says he might finish medical school after all when this is over. The visit lifted Robert's spirits, reinforcing the bonds that had been forged in combat. These men weren't just former subordinates. They were brothers in every sense that mattered. As October gave way to November, Robert progressed to the next phase of recovery, learning to use a prosthetic leg. The device was primitive by later standards, a wooden limb with a simple hinged knee and a rubber foot, heavy and uncomfortable. His first attempts were humbling. Robert, who had once commanded a tank with intuitive skill, now struggled to take a single step without assistance. The physical therapist, a no-nonsense British woman named Margaret Winters, pushed him relentlessly. Again, Captain, she would say, unmoved by his frustration. Your body is learning a new language. Repetition is key. Robert's natural determination found purpose in these sessions. He approached rehabilitation with the same intensity he had once devoted to combat tactics, setting daily goals and pushing beyond them. His progress impressed even the veteran hospital staff. You're advancing faster than most, Dr. Phillips noted during an examination in late November. Still experiencing phantom pain? Less than before, Robert admitted. The exercising helps. Good. We're recommending you for transfer to Walter Reed Hospital in Washington. They have advanced rehabilitation facilities, and you'll be closer to home. The prospect of returning to America stirred mixed emotions. Robert had been away for nearly 3 years, and the country he had left existed now only in memory. He was returning not as the conquering hero he had imagined, but as a wounded veteran with an uncertain future. During his final week in England, a surprise visitor arrived. Nurse Catherine Marshall had transferred from the London Military Hospital specifically to accompany the amputee transport to America. She had assisted during Robert's initial surgery and had followed his case with professional interest. Captain Mitchell, she greeted him, professional but with a warmth that transcended medical detachment. I'll be one of your attending nurses on the journey home. Catherine was in her late 20s with auburn hair tucked neatly beneath her nurse's cap and intelligent green eyes that missed nothing. Unlike many who interacted with the wounded, she looked directly at Robert, not past him or at his injury. I remember you, Robert said after a moment. You were there when I woke up after surgery. I was, she confirmed. You asked about your men before anything else. Made quite an impression. Their interaction was brief but left Robert feeling something he hadn't experienced since before his injury, a flicker of interest beyond survival and recovery, a reminder that life contained possibilities beyond war. The hospital ship departed Southampton on December 7th, 1944, exactly 3 years after Pearl Harbor had changed Robert's life. The crossing was rough, the North Atlantic punishing the vessel with winter storms that left many patients seasick in addition to their injuries. Robert spent much of the journey on deck when weather permitted, finding the open air preferable to the crowded wards below. It was during one such excursion that Catherine found him, braced against the railing, watching the endless gray waves. Most patients don't venture out in this weather, she observed, joining him at the rail. I spent months in a tank, Robert replied. Open space has value. She nodded, understanding. How's the pain today? Manageable. They stood in comfortable silence for a time, the ship rising and falling beneath them. Finally, Catherine spoke again. What will you do when you're fully recovered? The question caught Robert off guard. He had deliberately avoided thinking beyond the immediate challenges of rehabilitation. I don't know, he admitted. The Army's been my life for 3 years. Before that, I was a farmer in Texas. Will you go back to farming? Robert considered this. I'm not the same man who left that farm. Not sure I could go back to that life now. Few can go back, Catherine observed. But moving forward, that's still possible. Her words stayed with Robert long after she had returned to her duties. Moving forward, it was a simple concept but profound in its implications. He had adapted to the challenges of war. Perhaps he could adapt to this new battle as well. The hospital ship docked in New York Harbor on December 18th, greeted by a military band and a crowd of well-wishers despite the bitter cold. The wounded were transferred to trains bound for various military hospitals across the country. Robert, along with other amputees, was destined for Walter Reed in Washington, D.C. Catherine remained with the transport, efficiently managing her patients' needs during the journey. Her calm competence reminded Robert of his own leadership style, firm but compassionate, attentive to details that others might overlook. We'll arrive in Washington tomorrow morning, she informed him as they settled into the hospital train. Walter Reed has the best prosthetics department in the country. You'll be in good hands. Will you be stationed there? Robert asked, surprising himself with the question. For a time, she replied with a small smile. I've been assigned to the amputee rehabilitation unit for the next 6 months. The knowledge that this connection wouldn't be severed upon arrival offered an unexpected comfort. In a life now defined by constant change and loss, continuity held special value. Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. would become Robert's home for the next 22 months. The sprawling facility housed thousands of wounded from all theaters of the war, creating a community bound by shared sacrifice and determination. Chapter 10. The Long Road Back. Walter Reed Hospital, Washington, D.C., January 1945. The new year brought intensified rehabilitation for Robert Mitchell. Now officially promoted to major, he attacked his recovery program with military discipline, viewing each small improvement as a victory in a larger campaign. The prosthetics department fitted him with an improved artificial leg, lighter and more responsive than the British model. Learning to use it effectively became his primary mission, with daily therapy sessions pushing his endurance to its limits. You're making remarkable progress, Dr. Samuel Weinstein, the head of rehabilitation, noted during a February assessment. Most patients take months longer to achieve this level of mobility. Robert balanced on his artificial leg without support, demonstrating the results of countless hours of painful practice. Had good motivation, he replied simply. That motivation came partially from his military background, the ingrained discipline and determination that had made him an exceptional officer. But increasingly, it drew from a desire to reclaim independence and purpose beyond his identity as a wounded veteran. Nurse Catherine Marshall remained a constant presence during these months of recovery. Her professional relationship with Robert gradually evolved into friendship as she monitored his progress and offered encouragement during setbacks. The phantom pain again? She asked one evening, finding him sitting awake in the ward, his face tense with discomfort. Feels like my foot is cramping, he explained wryly. Hard to massage something that isn't there. Catherine sat beside his bed. Some patients find that visualizing the missing limb relaxing can help. Worth trying? Robert closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation and imagining the absent foot gradually relaxing. To his surprise, the pain began to subside slightly. Interesting, he murmured. Mind over phantom matter. The connection between brain and body is powerful, Catherine observed. Your mind hasn't fully accepted the change yet. Have I? Robert asked quietly, opening his eyes to study her face. Catherine held his gaze. That's not a medical question, Major. These conversations, often occurring during quiet evening hours when the ward was settled, became a touchstone for Robert. Catherine never offered pity, only practical support and occasional insights that challenged him to look beyond his physical recovery. As winter yielded to spring, news from Europe dominated the hospital. The Allied forces had crossed the Rhine into Germany, and the end of the war in Europe seemed imminent. For many recovering soldiers, including Robert, The report stirred complicated emotions: pride in the achievement, regret at not seeing the mission through personally, uncertainty about a world after war. In late March, Robert received unexpected visitors. Duke Wilson and Eagle Eye Harris, both recently returned to the States, arrived in full uniform, bearing news of the unit and the war's progression. "Company, I made it to the Rhine," Wilson reported proudly. "Using your tactics the whole way, sir." "Thunder Road's legacy," Harris added. "The brass finally adopted your methods as standard procedure, saved a lot of lives." Robert listened intently as they described the final campaigns in Europe, absorbing details about terrain, German defensive tactics, and the performance of American armor. His analytical mind still processed battlefield information automatically, even months removed from combat. "And Sullivan?" Robert asked, noting the absent crew member. "Got his medical discharge," Wilson explained. "Already enrolled in medical school for the fall semester. Said nearly dying made him appreciate living more." "And Martinez?" "Still in Europe with occupation forces," Harris answered. "Good assignment. Says the local girls appreciate his radio voice." The reunion continued for hours, the men reminiscing about their shared experiences while carefully avoiding discussion of Robert's injury or their own adjustment to civilian life. Some subjects remained too raw for direct examination. Before leaving, Wilson handed Robert a small wooden box. "Found this in your pack after Munsterbusch. Thought you might want it back." Inside was Robert's leather-bound notebook, the pages water-stained but intact. The tactical observations, equipment assessments, and personal reflections he had recorded throughout the campaign represented not just a military document, but a chronicle of his transformation from farmer to warrior. "Thank you," Robert said quietly, understanding the gift's significance. "Thunder Road may be gone," Wilson said, "but what we learned, what we did, that remains." After they departed, Robert spent the evening reviewing his wartime notes. The precise handwriting and methodical analysis reflected a mind focused entirely on survival and victory. The final entry, dated September 17, 1944, the day before Munsterbusch, ended mid-thought, a poignant reminder of how quickly circumstances could change. The following morning, during his therapy session, Robert pushed himself harder than usual, fueled by memories his visitors had awakened. Catherine, observing from nearby, noticed the change in his demeanor. "Everything all right, Major?" she asked as he rested between exercises. "Got some perspective yesterday," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Old crew members visited. Must have been good to see them." It was. He paused, organizing his thoughts. "Made me realize something. In the tank, when we lost equipment or took damage, we adapted. Found new approaches. That's what I need to do now." Catherine smiled slightly. "You're already doing it, every day." "Not just physically," Robert clarified. "I need a purpose beyond recovery. A mission." This realization marked a turning point. While continuing his rehabilitation with undiminished determination, Robert began to explore possibilities for his future. He consulted with vocational counselors, investigated educational opportunities under the newly created GI Bill, and reconnected with military contacts. In May 1945, news of Germany's surrender filled the hospital with celebration. For Robert, the victory brought validation that the sacrifices, his own and countless others, had achieved their purpose. Yet it also intensified the question of what would come next in a world without the clarity of wartime purpose. Throughout the summer, Robert progressed to the final stages of physical rehabilitation while beginning to lay groundwork for civilian life. He investigated business opportunities in Texas, drawing on contacts from his pre-war years. The prospect of operating a garage and repair shop appealed to his mechanical aptitude, providing a practical application for skills honed in the military. Catherine supported these explorations, often discussing options with him during the increasingly frequent occasions they spent together outside of medical contexts. Their relationship had evolved beyond professional boundaries, though neither had explicitly acknowledged the change. In September 1945, with Japan's surrender marking the official end of World War II, Robert received medical clearance for discharge. His recovery had progressed to the point where continuing rehabilitation could be managed independently, with periodic check-ins at VA facilities. The evening before his scheduled departure from Walter Reed, Robert invited Catherine to dinner at a small restaurant near the hospital, a place they had visited occasionally during his recovery. 22 months, he remarked as they waited for their meal. "Longer than I spent in combat." "Different kind of battle," Catherine observed. "One you fought admirably." Robert studied her face in the restaurant's soft lighting, memorizing features that had become deeply familiar. The slight arch of her eyebrows when she was skeptical, the faint freckles across her nose, the way her eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled. "I'm returning to Texas tomorrow," he said, stating the fact they had both been conscious of for weeks. "Setting up that garage I mentioned in Sinton. It's a small town, but growing. Good opportunity." Catherine nodded, maintaining her professional composure. "You'll do well there. You have the technical knowledge and people trust you naturally." "The thing is," Robert continued carefully, "I've gotten used to having a good medical advisor nearby." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small envelope. "The hospital in Sinton is looking for experienced nurses. I took the liberty of requesting information." He slid the envelope across the table. Catherine opened it, scanning the contents with an unreadable expression. "Are you attempting to recruit me, Major Mitchell?" she asked finally, looking up with a raised eyebrow. "Providing options," he replied, like any good commander. A smile slowly spread across her face. "I've been considering a change myself. My assignment here ends in 3 weeks." "Texas is different from Washington," Robert warned. "Hotter, more space, fewer people." After London during the Blitz and a crowded military hospital, space sounds appealing. Catherine carefully refolded the letter. "I'll consider it, seriously." They left the future deliberately unresolved that evening, both recognizing that whatever developed between them should unfold naturally, without the artificial pressure of immediate decisions. Some journeys couldn't be rushed. The following morning, Robert Mitchell departed Walter Reed Hospital, 22 months after arriving as a critically wounded amputee. He walked out under his own power, his gait showing only a slight unevenness that most observers would never notice. His artificial leg had become an integrated part of him, a symbol not of limitation, but of adaptation and perseverance. Chapter 11, Finding Home Again. Sinton, Texas, October 1945. The small garage on Wilson Street didn't look impressive from the outside, but Robert Mitchell surveyed his new business with quiet satisfaction. The Mitchell Automotive Service sign had been installed that morning, its fresh paint gleaming in the Texas sun. Inside, the equipment was minimal but of good quality, purchased with his military savings in a small business loan backed by the new Veterans Program. "Looks good, son," William Mitchell commented, standing beside his son. Now in his 70s, the elder Mitchell had aged considerably during the war years, but his pride in Robert was evident. "Your mother would have been pleased." Eleanor Mitchell had passed away in 1944 while Robert was in combat, a loss he had processed inadequately from a distance. Returning to the family farm without her presence had been one of the hardest adjustments of civilian life. "Hope it works out," Robert replied, characteristically understated. "Town needs a good mechanic." The garage represented more than a business venture. It was Robert's declaration of independence, his refusal to be defined solely by his wartime service or his injury. The technical skills that had made him an exceptional tank commander translated well to civilian mechanical work, and his reputation as a returning war hero ensured initial customer interest. Within weeks, the garage had established a steady clientele. Robert's meticulous workmanship and fair pricing built a reputation that spread beyond Sinton to neighboring communities. His military efficiency was evident in the shop's organization and in his ability to diagnose complex mechanical issues with systematic precision. The physical demands of the work served as continuing rehabilitation. Climbing under vehicles, lifting heavy components, and maintaining balance on concrete floors all day presented challenges for his prosthetic leg. But Robert adapted as he always had, developing techniques and tools to compensate when necessary. In December, Robert received a letter postmarked from Washington, D.C. Catherine Marshall had completed her assignment at Walter Reed and accepted a position at Sinton Memorial Hospital. She would arrive after the new year. The news accelerated improvements to the small apartment Robert had established above the garage. Basic furnishings were upgraded, walls freshly painted, and the sparse bachelor accommodations gradually transformed into a more welcoming space. These preparations reflected the evolution in Robert's thinking about his future. The war and his injury had stripped away youthful illusions about immortality and endless possibility. In their place had grown a mature appreciation for genuine connection and purpose, qualities he had found both in his work and increasingly in his relationship with Catherine. January 1946 brought Catherine to Sinton, and with her arrival, Robert's life expanded beyond the garage and the quiet routine he had established. She adapted quickly to small-town Texas life, her practical nature and genuine interest in people earning acceptance in the close-knit community. Their relationship developed naturally, building on the foundation established during his recovery. Professional admiration evolved into deeper connection as they discovered shared values and complementary strengths. Catherine's directness balanced Robert's occasional tendency towards stoic withdrawal, while his steady reliability provided an anchor for her more adventurous spirit. By spring, they had become a recognized couple in Sinton social circles, attending community events and church services together. The town watched with approval as the wounded war hero and the northern nurse built a life that represented hope and renewal after years of global conflict. In April, Robert received a surprise visitor at the garage. Colonel Richardson, now General Richardson, arrived in a staff car, still ramrod straight in his immaculate uniform despite the Texas heat. "Didn't expect to find you under a Buick, Mitchell," Richardson remarked as Robert wiped grease from his hands. "Better than being under enemy fire, sir," Robert replied with a slight smile. "What brings you to Sinton?" Richardson looked around the neat garage with approval, partly checking on a valuable military asset, partly delivering news. He handed Robert an official envelope. "3rd Armored Division is being reconstituted as part of occupation forces. They're implementing your tactical innovations as standard doctrine, and they need someone who understands them from the inside." Robert opened the envelope, scanning the contents with surprise. "You're offering me a position as an instructor?" "With promotion to lieutenant colonel," Richardson confirmed, "specifically focusing on armored tactics and crew training, based stateside with occasional trips to Europe. Your combat experience and analytical mind make you ideal for the role." "I'm medically discharged," Robert pointed out, gesturing toward his prosthetic leg. "Not fit for active duty." "Policy's changing," Richardson explained. "The Army's recognizing that some wounded veterans have skills too valuable to lose. New regulations allow limited duty assignments for certain cases. You qualify." The offer was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. Robert had maintained correspondence with former colleagues in the armored force, occasionally providing input on tactical questions. The possibility of returning to service, of continuing the work that had defined the most intense period of his life, stirred powerful emotions. "Need some time to think about this," Robert said finally. "Of course," Richardson agreed. "It's a significant decision. But don't take too long. The division needs you, Mitchell. So do the new tankers, who'll be fighting the next war if we don't prepare properly now." After Richardson departed, Robert closed the garage early and drove to the hospital to find Catherine. Her shift was ending, and they walked to a small park nearby to discuss the unexpected offer. "They must value your expertise highly," Catherine observed after hearing the details. "It's quite an honor." "It is," Robert agreed, watching children play on nearby swings, a scene of normality that would have seemed dreamlike during the war. "Question is whether it's the right path forward. What does your instinct tell you?" Robert considered this carefully. "That I could help, that the lessons we learned at such high cost shouldn't be lost," he paused. "But also that I've started something good here, found a different kind of purpose." "Those don't have to be mutually exclusive," Catherine suggested. "The position is stateside with only occasional travel. You could maintain the garage with a manager, perhaps." "There's another consideration," Robert said quietly, turning to face her directly. "Us. Whatever we're building here, would it survive that kind of change?" Catherine met his gaze steadily. "That depends on what we want to build, doesn't it?" The question hung between them, bringing into focus the undefined nature of their relationship. They had been carefully avoiding labels, allowing their connection to develop organically without the pressure of formal commitment. "I know what I want," Robert said finally. "Have for some time now." The following weekend, they drove to Corpus Christi and returned with a simple engagement ring. The decision to marry clarified Robert's thinking about Richardson's offer. After careful consideration, he accepted the position with specific conditions: limited travel requirements, ability to maintain his business in Sinton, and accommodation for his new family commitments. In June 1946, Robert Mitchell married Catherine Marshall in the small Methodist church in Sinton. The ceremony was attended by local townspeople and a notable contingent of military personnel, including his former crew from Thunder Road. Duke Wilson served as best man, while Eagle Eye Harris, Doc Sullivan, and Radio Martinez stood proudly in the wedding party. After a brief honeymoon on the Texas coast, Robert began preparations for his return to military service, albeit in a very different capacity than before. The garage was placed under the management of a promising young mechanic, with Robert maintaining ownership and oversight during his returns to Sinton. In August, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Mitchell reported to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where he had begun his military journey 5 years earlier. Now he returned as an instructor in the Armored Force School, tasked with developing training programs that incorporated the hard-won lessons of the European campaign. His first class of officer candidates found themselves facing an unconventional instructor. Mitchell used his combat notebook as a primary text, supplementing official doctrine with real-world examples from Thunder Road's 81 Days in Combat. His practical approach and first-hand experience commanded respect even from career officers. Forget textbook solutions, he told his students during their first session. In combat, the perfect plan lasts until the first shot is fired. After that, adaptation determines survival. This philosophy became the cornerstone of Mitchell's teaching method. While respecting established doctrine, he emphasized flexibility, mechanical understanding, and the critical importance of crew coordination above rigid tactical formulas. When students noticed his prosthetic leg, now fitted with an improved model developed for veterans, he incorporated it into the lesson rather than avoiding the subject. "This is the cost of a failure to adapt," he would explain. "We encountered a situation our training hadn't prepared us for, and we paid the price. Your job is to prepare your crews for the unexpected." Catherine established their primary residence near Fort Knox, but maintained connections in Sinton, where they returned regularly to check on the garage and visit family. Their partnership proved remarkably adaptable to military life, with Catherine accepting teaching positions at local hospitals wherever Robert's duties took them. Chapter 12, Legacy of Steel, Fort Knox, Kentucky, 1948. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Robert Mitchell arrived at the tank training grounds. Dawn was his preferred time for practical exercises, when the light was still soft and the day's heat hadn't yet built to its peak. "Morning, Colonel," the sergeant in charge of maintenance greeted him. "The M26s are fueled and ready." "Thank you, Sergeant. Have the students arrived yet?" "Just pulling in now, sir." Robert nodded with approval. Punctuality was non-negotiable in his training program. The new officers emerged from their transportation, looking alert despite the early hour. They had learned quickly that Mitchell's standards were exacting but fair. "Gentlemen," Robert addressed them as they gathered, "today we're evaluating the tactical differences between the Sherman and the new Pershing. I want you to experience firsthand the advantages and limitations of both designs." The M26 Pershing represented the evolution of American tank design, incorporating lessons from the European campaign. Heavier armor, lower profile, and a more powerful 90mm main gun addressed many of the Sherman's disadvantages against German armor. But Robert ensured his students understood that technical specifications were only part of the equation. "A superior tank with a poorly trained crew will lose to an inferior tank with a well-trained crew," he emphasized repeatedly. "Your primary responsibility is not the machine, but the men inside it." This philosophy had become the foundation of Robert's contribution to post-war armored doctrine. While others focused predominantly on technological development, he maintained that crew training, tactical flexibility, and mechanical reliability were equally crucial factors. His approach garnered both admirers and critics within the Army's hierarchy. Some traditional officers considered his methods unorthodox and his emphasis on crew initiative potentially undermining the chain of command. Others, particularly those with combat experience, recognized the practical wisdom in his teachings. General Richardson, now serving on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, remained Robert's most influential supporter. "Mitchell understands what most theorists miss," he told a congressional committee on military readiness. "Tanks are ultimately human weapons. Their effectiveness depends more on the quality of training than on technical specifications." This perspective gained increased relevance as tensions with the Soviet Union escalated into the Cold War. Intelligence reports indicated massive Soviet tank production, creating potential numerical superiority that echoed America's experience against German qualitative advantages in World War II. In early 1949, Robert was tasked with developing specialized training for tank crews, preparing for potential deployment to Europe under the newly formed NATO alliance. The program emphasized operations against numerically superior forces, incorporating his hit-and-move tactics from the Normandy campaign. During this period, Robert and Catherine established a more permanent home near Fort Knox. The stability allowed Catherine to accept a full-time position at the base hospital, where her experience with amputee rehabilitation proved particularly valuable as the Army improved its programs for wounded veterans. In November 1949, their first child was born, a son they named William, after Robert's father, who had passed away earlier that year. Fatherhood brought new perspective to Robert's work, strengthening his commitment to effective training that would save lives in future conflicts. Every tanker is someone's son, he reminded instructors in his department. Our job is to make sure as many as possible return home. The outbreak of war in Korea in June 1950 transformed theoretical preparations into urgent necessity. American armored units were deployed to the conflict, facing Soviet-designed T-34 tanks that outmatched the aging Shermans still in service. The M26 Pershing and newer M46 Patton tanks were rushed to the theater, but crew training remained a critical factor in early engagements. Robert received reports from former students now commanding tanks in Korea, confirming that his tactical principles remained valid against this new adversary. Several credited Mitchell's methods with their survival in the chaotic early months of the conflict. Though he requested deployment to Korea to observe firsthand, military leadership determined his greater value lay in accelerated training of new crews and officers at Fort Knox. The pace of instruction intensified, with Robert often working 16-hour days to prepare tankers for immediate deployment. You'll face an enemy with numerical superiority and home terrain advantage, he told each graduating class. Your edge will be superior training, tactical flexibility, and technological advantage. Use all three. In 1951, Robert was invited to consult on the development of the M48 Patton tank, which would become the backbone of American armored forces throughout the Cold War. His practical combat experience and analytical approach brought valuable perspective to the design process. Remember, the loader needs space to work efficiently, he advised engineers reviewing turret designs. And the commander needs visibility above all else. Better visibility saves lives. These contributions, though less visible than his training programs, ensured that lessons from Thunder Road's 81 days in combat continued to influence American armored warfare doctrine long after World War II ended. As the Korean conflict stabilized into stalemate, Robert gradually reduced his teaching load to focus on curriculum development and strategic planning. This transition allowed more time with his growing family. A daughter, Eleanor, had joined them in 1952, and occasional returns to Sinton, where the garage continued to operate successfully under management. In 1953, Robert received an unexpected invitation to attend a tankers reunion in Germany, where veterans from both Allied and former German forces would gather to commemorate the armored battles of World War II. After considerable thought, he accepted, viewing it as an opportunity for reconciliation and shared recognition of the human cost of conflict. Catherine accompanied him to Europe, her first visit to the continent, where they had both served during the war. For Robert, returning to the landscapes of his combat experience proved emotionally complex, memories simultaneously distant and immediate as they toured former battlefields in France and Belgium. Near the town of Munsterbusch, now rebuilt and peaceful, Robert stood silently at the spot where Thunder Road 2 had been destroyed and his war had ended. Nothing remained to mark the battle, just a quiet street in a small Belgian town, where children now played where tanks had once fought. It seems smaller, he observed to Catherine. In memory, everything was larger, more significant. It was, she replied gently. To the men who fought here, to the people who lived here, it was the center of the world that day. The reunion itself, held at a hotel in Frankfurt, brought together former adversaries now cautiously allied in the Cold War standoff with the Soviet bloc. Robert met several German tank commanders whose units had faced Thunder Road during the campaign, including a former Panther commander whose tank had been destroyed by Eagle Eye Harris's precise gunnery. You developed good tactics, the German officer acknowledged during their conversation. Different from standard American doctrine, more like our approach. We adapted, Robert explained simply. Survival required it. This exchange, multiplied across dozens of similar conversations during the reunion, reinforced Robert's core belief. Beyond technology, beyond numbers, the human element remained decisive in warfare. The capacity to learn, to adapt, to overcome technological disadvantages through innovation and determination, these qualities had defined Thunder Road's success and continued to inform Robert's approach to military education. Upon returning to the United States, Robert completed a comprehensive report on lessons from the reunion, incorporating perspectives from former German tankers that might prove valuable in potential conflicts with Soviet forces. This document, circulated at the highest levels of military planning, further cemented his reputation as a foremost thinker on armored warfare. In 1955, Robert received promotion to full colonel, accompanied by appointment as director of the Armor Officer Advanced Course at Fort Knox. This position, typically filled by combat veterans with conventional career paths, recognized his exceptional contribution despite his medical limitations. The appointment represented formal acknowledgement of what many already understood. Robert Mitchell had transformed personal adversity into institutional advantage, using his experience to reshape American armored doctrine for the challenges of a new era. His office at Fort Knox became a mandatory stop for foreign military delegations studying American tank training. Visitors were often surprised to discover that the legendary tactician walked with a prosthetic leg, a fact Robert neither advertised nor concealed, viewing it simply as part of his journey. In private moments, Robert sometimes reflected on the strange trajectory that had carried him from a Texas farm to European battlefields to military academia. The young man who had left Odessa after Pearl Harbor could never have imagined the path ahead, with its triumphs and tragedies, its moments of glory, and its permanent costs. Yet he recognized that each stage had been necessary, each challenge integral to the person he had become. The tank commander, the wounded veteran, the instructor, the husband and father, all were aspects of a life defined not by limitation, but by adaptation and growth. In his final lecture to each graduating class, Robert shared the philosophy that had carried him from the commander's hatch of Thunder Road to the classrooms of Fort Knox. In battle, as in life, it's not the initial plan that determines success, but the ability to adjust when that plan inevitably fails. The measure of a soldier, of a person, is not avoiding adversity, but responding to it with courage and determination. This principle, forged in the crucible of combat and tempered through personal recovery, became Robert Mitchell's enduring legacy to generations of American tankers who would never know the man, but would benefit from his hard-won wisdom. The farm boy from Texas had completed a remarkable journey, finding purpose not despite adversity, but through it, creating meaning from sacrifice, and ultimately discovering that the road home often passes through unexpected territory, but leads to destinations more valuable than any could predict. Thunder Road was gone, existing only in the memories of those who had served aboard her. But her spirit, the determination to adapt, to overcome, to persist against overwhelming odds, lived on in training fields and tank turrets wherever American armor deployed, a legacy more durable than steel and more powerful than any weapon of war.